It's time for the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Podcast.
We've got lots and lots of things to talk about and to do today. Covering the territories from the 1940s to the 1990s.
It's the best thing going today.
Interviewing wrestlers, referees, authors, and other media personalities that have made the sport of professional wrestling great.
The cream, yeah. The cream of the crop.
And now, here's your host, Tony Richards.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel History Show, coming to you live from the Richards Ranch in Western Kentucky. I'm your host, Tony Richards, for another trip back in the time tunnel to the territory days of professional wrestling. You know, here at the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel, we only specialize in the territory era, the 70-plus years that the territories the seeds were planted in the 1920s. They began to sprout and grow in the 1930s. They began to branch out in the 1940s. And then in the 1950s, television really solidified the geographic boundaries that would come to be known as territories. In the 1960s, we had a powerful period of growth. We're going to talk more about that today with my guest, George Schire. In the 1970s, we began to see fragmentation, the splitting apart, the closing down of some particular parts of the country, particularly in Texas and California, the Gulf Coast area. And then in the 1980s, we entered into the period of disintegration, so that by the mid-90s, the territories were all but obliterated. They were all but gone. It was primarily due to the innovation of technology and television and the ability for fans to see nationwide broadcasts and those geographic lines that had been so strong when television first came out in the late 40s and early 50s. And wrestling promoters began to syndicate their television shows around their particular markets and their geographic territory. That is what created the territory lines. And then satellite uplink and cable television is what completely obliterated those boundaries, so that wrestling could be seen across the country, or at least in large swaths of the country, much bigger than the small 250 to 400 mile territory area that had been before. And so that's what we're all about, is covering that whole story, the story of how the seeds were planted, and then the story of how the geographic lines were completely disintegrated. That's what we cover here. We're your home for the history of the territory era in professional wrestling. And today, on today's show, we're going to talk a lot about that particular era with two great guests on the show today. This is our second Tragos-Thesz Hall of Fame show, edition number 2. And, of course, this weekend in Waterloo, Iowa, the Tragos-Thesz Hall of Fame weekend will take place starting on Thursday afternoon, continuing all day Friday and all day Saturday. And I hope you're making plans to come be with us at the Tragos-Thesz Hall of Fame in Waterloo. Let me just tell you that if you love territory wrestling, if I haven't made it clear yet, that if you love territory wrestling history like we do, please subscribe to the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. There's 2 or 3 ways you can do that, but right now here on the History Show, make sure that on the podcast application where you're listening or watching our show right now, that you hit the bell or the follow button, or the subscribe button, or the like button, whatever button they've got there, to make sure that you're then subscribed. In every show we do, you get an alert or a warning that it's dropped. We drop every Wednesday morning at 5 a.m. Central Time, 6 a.m. Eastern, and we dive into the history of territory wrestling. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please follow our show. And if I could ask for one more favor, if you could do me a really big favor, please drop a 5-star review for us. There's usually a 5-star rating that you can push on your application, and that helps more fans discover our territory deep dives. If you're a video watcher of our show on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's Tony Richards Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel YouTube channel, or We also publish at our home base on Substack at TonyRichards4Substack.com. Okay, that's that piece of business. We're brought to you by the Grizzly Up Soap Company. If you're going to step into the ring like some of the old school legends we talk about here on the show, and you need to smell like you belong there, smell fresh and clean, Grizzly Up Soap Company is located right here in Western Kentucky in Hopkinsville. It's family owned, it's small batch, it's handcrafted goat milk soaps made for real people who do real things. Whether you're out on the ranch and you're working around like I am, or lately I've been clearing brush and trees. I've got some mulch coming in for my trees. I'm going to install some lighting around the base of some of my trees. It's going to look beautiful. I've got some painting to do outside. I've got some rails that walk up to the front of my house. My front door needs to be painted. My mailbox needs to be painted. There's just a whole lot of things that I need to do around the ranch. And at the end of the day of working here, I don't smell that great. But when I get into the shower with Totally Savage or Fierce with Grit or maybe Arctic Breeze, and you know my two favorites, Loaded Weapon and Kentucky Bourbon, not only do I come out of the shower smelling fresh and clean, and these bars with their all-natural ingredients, long-lasting scent, and all of that make my whole bathroom smell wonderful. I've had people come over to the bunkhouse, and they walk down the hall, and they're like, man, your bathroom smells good. Well, it's Grizzly Oak Soap that's making it happen. Their motto says it best. If you're going to be a bear, be a grizzly, and smell good while you do it. Shop the full lineup at grizzlyupsoapcompany.com. It's Grizzly Up Soap Co. grizzlyupsoapco.com, or swing by their storefront at 200 East 9th Street in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Grizzly Up Soap. Come on, Tony, get your mouth in order. Grizzly Up Soap Co. Get clean, get savage, and be a grizzly with Grizzly Up Soap. I don't know why I'm stumbling over that. Grizzly Up Soap. All right, today I have two special guests. My first guest is Ron Fuller of the famous Welch legacy. And as you know, I did 11 episodes of the Welch legacy about the Roy Welch family on Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw. And through those 11 episodes, also the announcement came down that the Welch family would be inducted in the Tragos-Thesz Hall of Fame this weekend. They're receiving the Lou Thesz Award for their contribution to professional wrestling. And Ron Fuller is part of the third generation of the Welch family. And today, we're going to wrap a couple of things into one. We're going to do our 1976 review of the year in Southeastern Championship Wrestling, which he was the owner of in Knoxville, Tennessee. So we're going to get a 76 review in. And we're going to talk about some of his family members, the four Welch brothers, Roy, Lester, Herb, and Jack. We're going to talk about some of the other family members that came from that second generation with Buddy Fuller. And also we're going to talk about the Golden family. We're going to talk about the Fields family, the entire group of family members that worked in professional wrestling from the 1920s all the way through the 1990s and even on up till today. We're going to talk about the Goldens. We're going to talk about all of them today with Ron Fuller. And I can't wait to get to it. So let's go to the Richards Ranch now and my special visit with today's first guest, Ron Fuller. The Lou Thesz Award is an award that recognizes individuals for professional wrestling industry that use their wrestling skills and platform in the realm of public service. It's presented to people who have been very impactful in the history of the pro wrestling business. Jim Ross has won it before. Trish Stratus, Magnum TA, John Bradshaw Layfield, and others. This year, it's being presented to a family dynasty, and been long overlooked in my estimation. As most people who follow me know, I'm very enthusiastically researching the family and talking about it. It's my goal to get the Welch family in every Hall of Fame that there is out there, because I think they should be in every one. And it's one of the few multi-generation wrestling dynasties that goes as deep in generations as it has. And I have one of the family members here, guy who's going to receive the award in a Waterloo this weekend, as a matter of fact. Ron Fuller's joining me today. Ron, how are you today, man?
I'm doing great, Tony. Always good to see you, man.
You bet, brother. I am so excited about this weekend.
Yeah, me too. Me too, man. It's a long time coming, I guess, a good way of putting it.
Well, it's funny how when you're so close to it, you just think everybody knows about the Welch family, But after we did that Briscoe and Bradshaw series, I had so many people reach out to me going, "Oh, I didn't know, that they were so influential." And I mean, the most powerful family ever in professional wrestling history, I think we'd be safe to say. Starting back in the if you go all the way back to your great grandfather, Big Ed Welch, you go back to the 1900s.
Yeah.
Back in Salazar, Oklahoma. And what's your thoughts about getting this prestigious Lou Thesz Award and your family going in the Hall of Fame?
Oh, man, I'm really I'm psyched about it, man. I didn't expect it, and I just happened to tune in and saw about the third guest of the series that you were doing with Jerry and them, wow, I was like, son of a gun, man, this guy knows his stuff, and this is really, really good, because a lot of times people talk about the Welch family and they ain't always good.
Yeah.
So I just got really into it, and wow, I get the same thing you do. I get people to say, "Boy, I've watched that," and some of them say, "I've watched it 3 times now."
Good.
I don't know how they can do that, but some people, I guess, can get highly involved in wrestling, man.
Well, it's so detailed, and there's so many things. I mean, not just from my perspective, but from Jerry's perspective, and Roy Welch is John Bradshaw Layfield's favorite wrestler of all time. And so from their perspective, everybody's adding so much stuff that what a lot of people tell me is every time they watch it, they hear something different that they didn't hear before. So, it's almost like you got to go back and watch it a couple of times just to get the full impact of it. You started promoting your territory in 1974. You bought it from John Kazana in Knoxville. It was called the Southeastern Championship Wrestling in October of 74, I believe. And
Right.
You moved on up to Knoxville. You had been in the wrestling business 5 or 6 years at that point. I think you debuted in 69. Is that right?
Yeah, actually 70.
70.
Right in my last year in college in 70, in May of 70 when I got out of college.
So from
I started in 70.
70 to 74, you worked for Eddie Graham in Florida, and also made a lot of frequent trips up to St. Louis for Sam Mushnick, as all the stars of the NWA. I mean, if you were anybody at all in the National Wrestling Alliance, you worked in St. Louis, and you got an opportunity to work up there several times. And then I guess you started promoting down in West Palm Beach for Eddie, right?
Right. Actually, I went to St. Louis, and I went. I had a guy that put together all my history of all my matches, every one. And I went back and looked the other day. I went to St. Louis 48 times
Oh my gosh.
over a 2-year period. So we had TVs, that's counting the TVs, go in there on Friday, stay over on Saturday, work the TV on Sunday, and fly back to Florida Sunday night. But yeah, so
Well, go ahead, Ron.
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say your grandfather, Roy Welch, was one of the first guys to join beyond the original 6 members of the National Wrestling Alliance. He was one of the first additional members that joined. And Sam Mushnick was always had a close relationship with the Welch family. As a matter of fact, I was always thought it was interesting. I was just telling Herb Simmons, I was in St. Louis a couple of weeks ago for the St. Louis Hall of Fame ceremony, and I was telling Herb Simmons that it was always interesting to me that you were always billed from Dyersburg, Tennessee when you went to St. Louis. And I think that was because of Sam's fondness for Roy and the Welch family.
Yeah, had to be. Yes. First time he introduced me, I was like, I wanted to turn around and say, where'd that come from, you know? So yeah, that Sam was really close with Roy, obviously, and the whole family. Sam's a heck of a story in himself, man.
You bet. You and I'm gonna get around to telling that story with Jerry and John here one of these days. It's on our list anyway. So you started promoting the town of West Palm Beach in Florida for Eddie, and you kind of got the promoter's bug, which it was in your blood and in your family anyway. Long line of that sort of thing. And then you decided that you discovered on a trip to the Smoky Mountains, I think on vacation, that you discovered this little promotion up there, and you decided you could do something with it. You met John Kazana and ended up buying it from him, and you started promoting up there in the October of '74. So by '76, you're about a year and 3 months into this. How were things going for you by the time '76 rolled around in Southeastern?
It was very difficult for me to get started. You know, I thought I knew what I was getting into, but I had no idea. You know, when you're so known in the territory, and found out right away that there was a connection to the Nashville office, and they were having to. That I was going to have to pay 10% booking fee. I had no idea when I bought the territory that there was a 10% booking fee involved. And so I found out so many different things right off the bat that made it difficult for me. My granddad and I had a great conversation. I told him, I said, hey, I didn't know anything about this booking fee. And he said, well, son, he goes, you know, that's been the deal with them for many, many years, long as they've been there, you know. And I said, well, you know, I'm thinking that I might go a different direction. And he says, he was always pretty upfront with me, you know. And he said, well, he says, I tell you what, he says, if you want to go your own route, you want to get your own talent, you want to run your own show, he said, I won't charge you nothing. He said, we'll back off and we'll let you do your thing over there. And really, when he was telling me all this, I'm almost see his face through the phone, and he's probably about to giggle, right? He's about to laugh because he knows what I'm going to get into when I do this. And so anyway, I said, well, I think, Granddad, I believe that's what I want to try.
Yeah.
Let me try and see if I can do this by myself. And so he said, good luck to you.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there was a certain amount of pride too. Got you on the phone there, and so much of what you were saying, the words probably echoed back to years ago when he started.
Yeah.
You know, he started running guys off, you know, back in the 30s and trying to get each of his towns going. So he probably knew what you were in for, but he probably also knew you didn't know what you didn't know. So
yeah, that's it. I think that's probably most of it right there. Boy, this kid don't know nothing. You know?
You got you got some stars in there in '76. One of them is Professor Toro Tanaka, who was a major heel in almost every Southern territory there in the mid '70s. And but you also got some guys there that's local legends. On January 25th of 1976, Ron Wright captured the Southeastern Heavyweight Championship there, and for his 5th time, which he would go on to hold that title several more times. Tell us a little bit about Ron Wright for maybe some of our listeners that are not as
Wow.
familiar with him.
He's the greatest character I've ever around in wrestling. I mean, and I've been around a whole lot of them. And Ron Wright, he's just right there at the top of it. He was a crazy dude. He owned himself an airplane. That scared the heck out of me. The first time I saw his plane, he called me up. He said, "Ron, you going up to West Virginia?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm booked there." And he says, "How about you stop off here and go with me?" And I said, because I had to go through there. He lived in Kingsport. So I said, "Okay, I'll drop off." And he says, "Now you come out the airport there." And I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Oh, the what?" He said, "Out the airport, right?" And I said, "But did they fly from there to up?" And he says, "No." He says, "I'm going to fly us." I was like, whoa. I wanted to back out right away. But, and I'm telling you, I had some flight stories with him that were just, absolutely ridiculous, man.
Okay, I got to ask you. So, where were you the most scared? Were you the most scared with Ron Wright or Eddie Graham flying?
Or Eddie who?
Eddie Graham. Didn't you fly with
Eddie
Eddie?
Graham? Oh yeah, Eddie. Flew. Oh, Eddie was a piece of cake compared to Ron Wright.
Oh, okay. Well, I've heard some stories about Eddie's flying from time to time.
Oh yeah, Eddie would. To me, the times I was on with Eddie, I never had any questions much. But boy, Ron Wright was a man. Flying into Bluefield. That story I just started to tell there. Flying into Bluefield.
Yeah.
We left there and it was getting dark, and we got about halfway to Bluefield, and then the fog came in. Couldn't see the ends of the wings, and it's all foggy. And he says, I said, "Ron, you verified? You flight verified? You've gone through your." "Well, Ron," he says, I'm in the last part of it." He said, "I know most of it." And I said, "Well, what do we?" I got to looking around, and I looked at the altimeter, and we're about 5,000 feet. And then, he had a map. He handed me a map. He said, "You might need to help me a bit, though." And he handed me a map, and then he says, he looked around, and he said, "Wow," he goes, "Ron," he goes, "I don't know all of it that I'm supposed to know, and I said, "Well, Ron," I said, "I'm looking at the map, and it says there's a 6,000-foot mountain right in this area here, and we're flying at 5,000 feet." And I said, "And you can't see the end of the wings out here." And I said, and it was already dark. And so he says, I said, how do you know where we are?" And he says, "We're in the valley, Ron." I said, "How do you know we're in the valley, Ron?" He said, "We're in the valley. We got to be in the valley." We'd hit the mountain, right? Oh man, we had I had a lot of trips with him that he was a character, man, beyond anybody I ever knew, I guess. And
there's another guy that worked for you from time to time too, Ronnie Garvin, who used to fly. Did you fly with Ronnie?
I flew with Ronnie a couple of times. Ronnie was a good pilot.
Yeah.
Ronnie was a hell of a pilot. Well, Ron Wright was actually a hell of a pilot. I flew with him probably 10 times and we never crashed. So I had to give him credit for being fairly good at what he was doing. But
he had trouble getting out of town one time, didn't he? Didn't he get out to the airport and his plane been burned up?
Yeah. Harlan, Kentucky.
That's a heel there.
Kentucky.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh boy, and Harlan, Kentucky, and those Kentucky towns, man, especially down there in that part of the country in the mountains, they were dangerous as heck. And he flew his plane in there, and then and the next day after the matches, we worked in Harlan that night, had a riot, and 30 seconds into the match, my dad was there and he couldn't get in the ring on the riot. He never got to work, and he asked me for a long time, "I want to wrestle in Harlan, Kentucky." I got him booked and I got him in the ring, and we're in the last match, and 30 seconds in we have a riot. And Ron Wright, the next night, we were in whatever town, and he said, Ron, he goes, I had a bad night. And, I said, what do you mean? After that matches, he said, I went down there, he chopped my plane down. He said, I knew where she was. And I looked down there on the end of the runway, and then she was gone. And I said, what do you mean she was gone? And he said, my plane was gone. He said, and then I looked and I saw some smoke coming up. He said, I walked down there and he looked over. He said, I looked over the edge of the mountain and there she was, just a burning up. He said, Dad, we had some heat, big heat. It shoved my plane off the mountain. So,
You're
crazy dude.
You're changing as you would do, because you're trying to create excitement in the territory, still fairly new since you've taken over. And I'm sure what you're trying to do is you're trying to encourage fans that you don't want to miss a card. If you do, you might miss something. So you're changing the title quite a bit. Another guy from down there in Tennessee who worked a lot of Southern territories was Don Carson. And Don beat Ron Wright for the title on February 13th. What memories do you have of Don Carson?
Oh, my gosh. Don Carson is one of those characters, too, man. Wow. Everybody loved Don Carson. You had to love him, though. He was a great guy. I love to have Don Carson in my territory because he was great in my dressing room. And I found out early on, running companies, if you've got a dressing room that's happy and you guys are all happy and ready to go to the ring and ready to really work their butts off, you need a guy like Don Carson that just keeps that dressing room roaring. And Don, and a great worker too. He not only was that, he could work either babyface or heel. Didn't make any difference.
Now, did you employ that same philosophy in your hockey team? Did you have guys on your hockey team that were good locker room guys?
I had a coach that basically he was the prime guy.
He's the guy that scared all the other owners, right?
Yeah, he's the guy that when I told him I spent 2 months looking for a coach, and and then I finally found this guy, and you know where he was from? He was from Calgary, Canada, and the first time I met him, we sat down. He didn't know anything about me, and I didn't know anything about him, and he said, well, what did you do? And, and I said, I've been a wrestler for a lot of years. And he said, I'll be darned. He goes, I love wrestling. And he said, I like that guy. There's a guy there, and he wrestled it. And he kept trying to remember his name, and I said, Stomper. And he goes, oh, yeah. He goes, Mongolian Stomper, right? So I had gone and hired the guy that was a big wrestling fan out of Stu Hart's country up there.
Yeah.
And he was just as crazy as some of the other wrestlers were. I mean, he kept that thing rolling. He really, really had those guys going, and he had them doing things that nobody else would have let their players do.
I just remember when you went back to talk to the owners about your coaching hire, they kind of freaked out and said, "Oh my gosh, not that guy."
Yeah, because he had played in the National Hockey League, and he was a goon.
Right.
I mean, they sent him in there to fight, and and so it was perfect for me.
Every time you tell that story, I laugh out loud, man, because they were saying, "Oh, you're not going to bring any of that wrestling type stuff in here into the hockey league, are you?" And you're like, "Oh no, I'm not going to do that." And then when they found out who your coach was, they just about lost it.
Oh yeah, they weren't happy about it. Nobody was happy about it.
Do you remember when you first met Don Carson?
Oh, I met Don Carson as a kid. Don used to. Wow, he goes probably back early days in the 50s with Mobile, with the Mobile territory.
Yeah, he had a great tag team with Dick Dunn, the Red Shadow. Dick Dunn was the Red Shadow, Don Carson and the Red Shadow.
They were top workers in Memphis. I was in Australia with them. They were the tag team champions in Australia,
Wow.
Carson and Dunn. And so, yeah, he was Don was a real character, and like I said, he just kept dressing rooms just really, he was just constant. I got one for you real
Yeah,
quick.
sure.
I hope I haven't told you this one, but
That's fine.
my dad came to me one time about this same time period, 1976 or so, and he says I had the town kind of going at that point, and that kind of built it to where I was in the Coliseum and doing big crowds, and I had this big world championship show coming, and my dad came to me and he said, "Would you do me a personal favor?" And I said, yeah, of course I will. What is it? And he says, would you put George Goulas on the opening match of this world championship card you got coming? And I was like, oh, I wanted to say, Dad, I'd do anything for you, but that, right? I mean, George was not exactly. And so everybody in the dressing room, I had to go around and tell all the boys that, look, hey, look, guys, I told them story. I promised my dad I would do as a favor for him with Nick that I would put George on this card. Oh, all the boys. Oh my God, Ron, you're serious? You're gonna let George Goulas start the matches out that night in this big card? Yeah, guys, I'm going to do that. So I told everybody, I said, do me a favor. I said, please be nice to him. You don't have to kiss his butt, but it be cordial to him. Be nice to him,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And so George shows up and he goes around the dressing room like normally when you're not in the territory, you go introduce yourself and you make everybody feel comfortable. And so he went around all the guys, and I was listening. I wasn't actually following him around, but I was listening. And when he got to Don, everybody had been nice to him. He got to Don, and he slapped Don on the back, and he said, "How you doing, Don?" And he says, he turned around and looked at him and says, "We're eating here, George. That's how I'm doing. We're eating good here, George." In other words, I'm not starving over there.
Right. Right.
And I could drop my head like, oh my goodness gracious. So,
Well, just a little bit more background on that. I mean, I just remember this from my research and all, but 76 is about the time, somewhere around in there is about the time your dad moved back to Tennessee to take care of your grandfather and to watch after his part of the promotion with Nick, right? So that probably was part of that, I guess.
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. And he was there he was around Nick quite a bit, because he's trying to, take care of Roy's responsibilities too.
Yeah,
And
right.
so it was, I understood it when he asked me, I didn't really like the idea, I knew what was going to happen with the crew that I had.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the 76, prior to 76 and 75, in order to get to where we were at the point we were in 76, I had Dale Lewis, the old shooter, right?
Yeah, you bet.
I had Dale Lewis came and moved to Knoxville to help me out. He stayed there and he worked all my cards in Knoxville, and then he worked in Nashville the rest of the week. And I had, I had just some of the greatest workers, man, in the history of the sport. Danny Hodge,
Yeah.
Danny was there every weekend. So I had these shooters and stuff, man, in my crews, and and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to give them a lot of wrestling, because they'd never gotten a lot of wrestling in that territory. It was Kazana and it was Ron Wright. And Ron Wright wasn't going to do any real wrestling, and so by the time we got to 76, those boys being there and in that territory, and then like you said, we get Tanaka. And Tanaka's a big star. I mean, and actually Tanaka worked a lot for me, quite a bit. he loved Knoxville. He fell in love with Knoxville, and he just wanted to stay. And my gosh, you got a guy like that, he can stay long as he wants, right?
Oh, you're one of the top heels in the whole wrestling business.
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, how do you get this guy? I had a lot of guys say, how do you get Tanaka to live there? I said, he just likes it, man. He likes the city and he likes the countryside. And, so,
And it
so
was
I was really lucky. I benefited a lot from having a territory that had close shots so that you were home every night before midnight and made big money on it for every Friday.
You bet. And you're building toward, I don't guess you're quite there yet, but you're building toward being able to move to the Coliseum every now and then, right?
Oh yeah. So we went there, and as soon as I got involved, as soon as I got to early 1975, I'd only been there 3 months. I had a show in the Coliseum. I took it to the Coliseum. We didn't have half a crowd; it was half full, but it was me and Jack Briscoe wrestling for the world title, and it took a while to build it, but yeah, eventually it wasn't big enough. That's what happened to us about by 1977 or so. We set the all-time record there for attendance and for a sporting event in that building. Still the record, 60-something years later. Nobody's ever broke that record. And then the building wasn't big enough. After 1977, 78, on into early 79, we were just kicking butt. But 76 was a key year for us. And as I remember, Don Carson, Dick Dunn, talked about Dick Dunn just a second ago. Dick Dunn and Tarzan Baxter were my tag team champions, wearing masks, superstars, two great workers. Wow. I mean, I was like, I really was lucky. I was lucky. I had a lot of guys and I had relationships. I had been in Australia with Dick Dunn and Don Carson, and I had been around all these guys growing up as kids, lots of them. And they were fans. They wanted to help me, and I got more help from great wrestlers. I got talent that I should have had no chance to get.
Well, we're going to talk about them a little bit more here in just a little bit, but your cousins, the Fields boys down in the Gulf Coast territory, I think Baxter worked down there as the wrestling pro
Right.
for years.
Yeah, with the mask, white outfit and the mask.
Dick was he worked a lot of mask gimmicks.
Yeah, my dad trained Tarzan Baxter.
Oh yeah,
yeah, in the 50s. Yeah.
You'd mentioned your hockey coach favorite wrestler was Mongolian Stomper. You're actually in a program with him in the spring of '76.
Yeah,
y'all got a Southeastern heavyweight title versus a TV trophy program, and I mean you got some good things going here. It's just like anything else, any other business, it just takes time and consistency. You finally got a good television station, and this is like you say, this is a pivotal year for you.
Yeah, it was a real pivotal year for me. I got baby faces that came there and wanted to stay. Bob Armstrong. And Bob Armstrong was one of the greatest workers ever.
You bet.
Could go anywhere in the world and wrestle on top. He loved Knoxville. He was like Tanaka. I mean, it was like Stomper was, and I mean, they loved that part of the country, and they felt comfortable there. They made good money. I ended up about in that time period of 76 realizing that if I wanted to keep good talent, that there were certain guys in the crew that needed to make the money to stay. And so I started, you mentioned Ronnie Garvin when he came there. And I had started in Florida working with Ronnie Garvin. We were married for 3 years. And I mean, Eddie liked watching us work, and he just booked us constantly against each other, every town, everywhere. And anyway, he came there, and I knew what kind of money he needed to make, so I put guys on guarantees. Stomper had a guarantee, Ronnie had a guarantee, Bob Armstrong had a guarantee, Tanaka had a guarantee. I mean, it was it was it was the smartest thing I ever did. I mean, I could have let them stay there and get not quite enough money to stay and be happy and content, and end up leaving after 2 months and losing them by giving them a little bit of extra clout. No one knew what they were going to make, and they knew they were all their trips were going to be short. They knew that Knoxville was going to be a sellout, and so it just helped me make that happen. About 1976, that was one of the things I did that had a lot to do with being successful that early.
Well, you had several guys in there that were, you mentioned, good wrestlers. That summer, you had Bob Armstrong was with the Great Mephisto in a program. Was that Frankie Kane?
Frankie Kane. Yep. Great Mephisto, Frankie Kane. Louis Tillett was there.
Mm-hmm. You had a guy you probably met in Florida, George McCreary.
Yeah, George McCreary.
George
was
a
wrestler, man.
fantastic
Little opening match wrestler.
Yeah.
And and that's what I wanted. I wanted to teach them that they had been there and they had seen all this fighting and gouging and blood and all that, and that's why I loved having the guys like Lewis and Hodge there, had all that wrestling background. I knew they were going to do a whole lot of wrestling. And George McCreary was a great little amateur, and I stuck him on the first card every night. And I told whoever he worked, I said, you follow him. I said, hey, no eye gouging, I want to see some wrestling. You're going to learn something tonight.
There are those guys back in this time period where the National Wrestling Alliance, the opening match you were going to go through, and it was going to be a wrestling match. And George McCreary is one of those guys that I think you could just put his picture beside this is the epitome of a great opening match wrestler.
That's what he was. And he did not mind it at all. He didn't want to be a main eventer. I don't think he would have worked the main event if I'd booked him there. He'd go, what did you put me in that for?
Right.
He liked that spot he was in. And I made a point of letting him know that that's what I wanted. You are here because you're a wrestler, and you're going to go out and lead the matches.
That's just something that, I mean, there's a whole lot of things I don't understand about today's product, but the one thing I don't understand is guys come out there going 1,000 miles an hour right up the first match. I just don't. It doesn't compute because I just come from the same era you come from, right? Where
and my granddad and my dad.
Yeah, where you got to establish something, and
go out there and establish some wrestling, man. I mean, when all else fails, take a hold.
Yeah.
Right? Take a hold and just settle down and go a different direction. And and nowadays, like you say, the first match they have 5 false finishes, and I mean, it's just over the top rope and all the flips and flying, and so, and when the next match comes, it's the same thing, and it's the same thing, and it's
by the time the main event gets there, I'm wore out.
Yeah. And you've seen it all, I've seen that. Oh, I saw that finish in the first match.
Right.
I saw that false finish, I mean, it was just like, so it was a story. It was a story that had to be told from the very opening bell until the main event. And,
one of the things that I think would have been hard for you tell me if it was or not, but I mean, you've got to keep a fairly, you mentioned the things that you were doing for the guys that you had there that you wanted to keep satisfied or whatever, but you can't keep a bunch of guys. I mean, you're not running that many towns. So I'm thinking, having your tag teams, which I know was important to you, but you had to be real selective about them because you couldn't keep, what, 15 guys?
3 of them. Yeah, right? Couldn't have 3 tag teams.
Right. That's what I'm thinking.
I had the smallest territory in the country. Mine was the absolutely smallest territory in the country. I mean, it was 150 miles to the north and 150 miles wide, and Knoxville was right there in the center of it, and that was it. You had Tuesday night. The only other town you ran weekly was Johnson City and Kingsport, Tri-Cities up there.
Yeah.
And the other nights were in every one of them was spot shows, schools, little small towns. But wow, we were packing those gyms. My gosh, boy, we used to put people. We had go football stadiums in the summertime.
Wow.
Couldn't put them all in the gyms. The gyms you'd pull up there an hour before starting time, and the people would be standing out of line, and I'd go into the building, and the building's already packed. We'd turn away 3,000. We put 3,000 in a big gym, and we'd turn away another 3,000 that couldn't get in there. It was just really, really a hot territory. And
What'd you have? Like you have 12 to 14 guys?
yeah, had a
Something like that.
14-man crew.
Yeah. something like
14-man
that.
crew. Sometimes you pump it and later on in the 77, I'd pump it to 16. I might put two more people on the crew. But I never had those 20-man crews and none of that. I very rarely had any of that type of stuff.
Well, one of the things I really wanted, two things I want to get to before we get into your family and the Hall of Fame. In '76, the Funks were doing a deal where it was almost like a reverse, because when Dory Funk Jr. had the title, it was Terry that was going around that you had to beat to get in with Dory Funk Jr. Well, now it's reversed. You got to beat Dory Funk Jr. to get a match with Terry, who's the NWA champion at this time. And
Right.
You've got a Texas death match with him. And you guys run this at the baseball stadium?
Yes, we went to baseball stadium for it.
And it rained that day, right?
And it rained. Oh God, it rained. It rained. It rained so bad that I don't know if the people in the stands could see the rain. You know, we went out there and worked anyway. And it was one of those deals that you're exactly right. From the year before that, where I was going to work with Junior, Terry came in. I did some stuff with Terry. I had to beat Terry. I had to go through Terry to get to Junior.
Mm-hmm.
And now Terry won the belt, and Junior came 2 or 3 times for me.
Okay.
Put me over in the Texas death match in a driving rainstorm.
So not only did he put you over, but he put you over in their match, the Texas death match.
Yes, in their type of match. Yes, I mean, it was like I love the guys. I love those guys. I love the Funks. They were all business. They were, wow.
That's the one thing I've always heard about Dory when he was the champion, Dory Jr., is he had to maintain the credibility of the title, but he always did what was best for business in the territory. Whatever
Right.
territory he was working, he did what was going to do the best for business.
He made you look like a champion.
Yeah.
He
Yeah,
made
he
you
might have
look
been
like
one of the more
champion rather than him.
and that's one of the things I think was so great about Dory Jr. as the champion is he made you look like you could beat him.
Yeah, yeah. It was a match from beginning to end, and it was a wrestling match.
Right.
He loved the forearms. He didn't want to throw the punches.
Those upper forearm
There was no
cuts.
fight. There was no fight. It was the forearms, and it was a totally different match than you had with anybody else. And I think that was one of the best things about Junior. He had his own style, and you were going to get a lot of wrestling, and people were going to go walking away talking about it, believing, say, "Wow, that was great. That was really something."
And because your territory is smaller, you probably only got the NWA champion once a year, right?
Yeah. Maybe 2 times.
Maybe
As
two.
it went on, though, boy, it began to increase.
Yeah.
And the reputation of the territory got around. And by 1976, late in 76, going into 77, I had a conversation. In fact, I didn't have the conversation. The champion, I think, went back and he talked to Sam about it. And he said, I like that town. I like that territory. I know Harley did that for me. And Harley, first time Harley ever worked for me, and I paid him off in $1,000 bills and $100 bills is what it was. So I started counting out the $100 bills. He put his hand out there, and I was counting out the $100 bills, and when I got up to about 20, the old story, you probably heard the story about the guy, the promoter that used to pay his talent that way. He paid his talent every night, and he would stand in front of them. They put their hand out there, and he would be putting the money in their hand, and they were looking at their hand, right? Not him. And he's looking at them, right? And as soon as he saw an inkling of a smile, any reaction, that was the end of the
That's
payoff.
the end of the payoff.
He didn't go any further, right? He didn't need to. So yeah, I ended up getting them. Oh, I was getting them 4 times, maybe 4 times a year before I left the Southeastern, before we had the war.
And that, I mean, that was an accomplishment to get the champion. That, I mean, a lot of the bigger territories, that was about the most they ever got him was 4 times.
Yeah, and the champions always loved it.
Yeah,
I mean, every one of them always just, they were so thankful, and they just. I was just lucky. I was blessed. I was blessed to have. I don't know whether it was respect, maybe for back as far as Roy, from some of those old guys, that they had just so much. They treated me differently, I think, than most promoters, and and being a part of this, Roy and my dad, and all the things that they accomplished and they did, and all the wrestlers that they knew. I mean, that I knew. I grew up watching kids, because wrestlers would show up at the house.
yeah.
All the stars, even the heels. We lived on farm. They wouldn't be driving up and making it known they were there, but they would park in the back of the house, and Dad would meet him on the back part of the. I'd have to meet and see all kinds of stars, and I kind of like grew up with them, so it made it easy for me.
Toward the end of '76, we mentioned his name earlier, but I mean, his is going to be one of your cornerstone stars. And you actually, after he wins the title in October, Ronnie Garvin, you keep the title on him for most of the rest of the year. He would eventually become known as Mr. Knoxville. But Ronnie really he found a home there with you as well there at the end of '76.
He sure did. And Ronnie was always, I thought, a great worker. Even when I started in Florida down there as a green guy, and like I said, first time Eddie saw me work with Ronnie, it was like, wow. Eddie, I knew when I got booked so many times after that, I'd be on the card against Ronnie. I knew that was Eddie, and Eddie saw something there that was really good.
Yeah.
And so when I went to Knoxville, one of my first promises to myself is I'm going to get Ronnie Garvin in my territory. And I was able to do that. And then I had to give him a little bit of a guarantee, but that it was worth every penny of it.
He, back in these days, and you're kind of an exception because you've been in the business now. This is your 7th year in the business. Most of the time back in this era, you weren't really that good in the ring until you hit about your 5th or 6th year. And then Ronnie's just hitting his 10th year in the business right here. So he's a veteran at this point and really knows how to work for you in this particular situation. And
he knew he wanted it to be good. He wanted the territory to be good, and I think that was critical. Stomper wanted the territory to be good. Bob Armstrong wanted it to be good. The important people. They got their heart and soul in it, like I did. They'd got to be a part of their life, and they knew that sooner or later they got to go and take a little break, but they can always come back.
So, whose idea was it, Ron, to repeat the old Paul Jones angle of throwing the title off the bridge?
Well, that was my idea because I loved that.
Yeah.
I'd never thought about that until Paul Jones did that, the Gandy Bridge here in Tampa,
Yeah.
and I saw the reaction. I saw the crowd they blocked the whole highway, and it was like and then I said, I put it in the back of my mind. It's one of those things that you register back here. Someday I'm going to do that. And,
Yeah.
and then Ronnie was the perfect guy. He was a nasty heel. It was a nasty, dirty belt that had been there for years and years, and wanted to, rather than throw it in the trash can, why the heck not do exactly that? Let him go down and say, I'm going to take this dirty belt down to the Candy Bridge over here in Knoxville, and I'm going to throw it in the Tennessee River, by gosh.
Oh my
It's a
gosh.
piece of junk, right? And
And of
oh,
course,
it
your
was
fans in
unbelievable.
Knoxville have never seen this before.
Oh no, nobody had ever done that type of angle up there in that part of the
Right.
country. And
Right.
wow, the police couldn't get control of the crowd. They just closed off the bridge. They just shut it down, and they did quit trying because the
Did
fans
you
just kept coming.
did you tell them you were going to do it or no?
Oh no, I didn't really register. I had Ronnie say it on TV. He made the whole interview. It's this crummy belt, and I'm sick of it. And why has anybody got this? I'm throwing this sucker off the bridge, and
I love that.
but that it just wow, it was unbelievable. It was kind of like the Paul Jones deal. I mean, they were just thousands of people on the bridge. The bridge shut down, so they could watch him throw that into the river. And there was boats down there trying to catch the belt down in the water. So it was one of those great little angles that people never forget.
So this weekend in Waterloo, your family is being inducted into the Tragos-Thesz Hall of Fame, and you're receiving the Lou Thesz Award. And let's just go back to your grandfather. I mean, your great grandfather, Big Ed, was a wrestler, and of course, he was Roy's dad. But as far as territory wrestling is concerned, your grandfather was one of the architects of territory wrestling, starting all the way back into the early 30s, starting the Tennessee territory out of the little West Tennessee town of Dyersburg. He would become the booker for the promoter in Nashville in 1937. And eventually in 1940, he and Nick Gulas would take over Nashville by using junior heavyweights there. But just a tremendous innovator in the business of pro wrestling. I mean, he was inventing it as he went along. There was no real blueprint for this stuff, and he was doing it on such a large scale for the times, with limited transportation, the roads in many cases. I remember reading a couple of stories. They were secondhand stories because Roy didn't really talk that much about his history or about the territory, but he did tell close friends and people like George Harris and people like that who were interviewed in later days by Scott Teal. Talk about where they crossed the Mississippi River over to Missouri on a ferry boat and had to go that way to make towns and things of that nature, and ended up pretty much exiting the state of Florida because it was just too far. I was looking at his match record back in the 40s when he was trying to bring Florida in. And he would it would take 3 days. He wouldn't have a match for 3 days. So I could ascertain he was on his way there. And then he would have a week or 2 weeks worth of matches. And then he didn't have a match for 3 days. I'm like, oh, okay, he's on his way home. He's on his way home then. So talk about your grandfather a little bit.
Oh, Jace, man. I gotta get, since you brought that up, I made the show myself, crossing the ferry, the Mississippi River over into Missouri
Yeah.
to work down in Missouri a couple of times, and they went through some horrible things as far as roads and highways and stuff like that were concerned. My granddad was wild. He was a character beyond belief. No, uh, he owned a dairy. Besides his wrestling company, he owned a dairy that started out, I remember as a little boy, probably 7 or 8 years old, they were milking 12 cows. He had 12 cows in one little small barn. And by the time he ended up in the 70s, it was probably the biggest dairy in the South. He milked 1,000 cows a day. And my grandmother actually helped him build ter- that he built the territories and she built the farm and the dairy.
Yeah.
But granddad was crazy. He would drive 100 miles an hour. He had a Cadillac, always had a Cadillac. He was a love of Cadillacs. And he lived on his farm was down a dirt road, probably a half a mile from where you turned out of his driveway before you got to asphalt. And when I used to ride with him to Memphis, and he would tell me stories and stuff all the way there and back, and we would drive down the driveway and we'd turn onto the dirt road. And before we got to the asphalt, which was a half a mile away, he'd be doing 100 miles an hour, if not more. And he had one of those things on his Cadillac where when you went to above a certain speed, the alarm went off. With a little button back in the day. And so when he turned onto the asphalt, now he's going to really crank her up, right?
Wow.
And he would be, I'd hear it, he would, many times it would go off, and I'd look over there because you could see what the speed was. And it'd be 120, 125. I mean, big old car, man, just rolling down the road. Nobody on the road. Drive right down the middle of the road because you only had 2-lane highway. So he used to down the middle of the road. When somebody came over the hill, he'd get on his side and back in the middle of the road. And he just would be like crazy. I can remember he used to, I guess, take care of the governors. He was smart about his operation, and he knew that he had to connect it politically or he wasn't going to be going business. That's why he didn't have much opposition. And so he would go to all these governors and he'd give them big contributions to the campaign. Here we go. Hey, take a little bit of this. And he was always forking over that money. And so in return, some of them would give him these cards, little cards deals, right?
So like a get out of jail free card.
There you go. And basically this guy's a big wheel, right?
Right.
So and I remember a lot of times he'd get stopped, because he's going to 120 miles an hour. He'd come over a hill and the cop can't hardly catch him. He don't slow down. He just keeps on going until they get up close enough. He's like, okay, he takes care of business. So he pull over to the side. And then the cop would come to the window and he would just leave it up. He would not put it down, and the cop would knock on the window and he'd put it down and he'd say, and the cop would say, do you know how fast you're going? And he would say, and he'd say, yeah, just a second. And he would open up the little thing between his two front seats, and he would reach down there and he would file through the cards: Mississippi, Tennessee, Arkansas,
what state am I in?
Whatever state he was in, right?
Yeah.
He'd have to find the card, and then he wouldn't even say anything. He would just say, he'd reach over there and he'd hand him the card. And
Wow.
And I watched it many, many times, and the policeman or whoever it was, he would read through that. And he would look in there and he'd look back at the card and he'd look in there again like, good God, who is this guy? And then, some of them would say, who are you? And well, my name's Roy Welch. And you know, so-and-so, the governor, you know,
The card says it all, man.
yeah,
The card
yeah,
says
the
it all.
card says it all. Is this legit? You mean, am I looking at something legit here? Right? And then he'd put the cards back in their place. And and the cop would be going back to his car, and he'd already be 100 miles an hour. He didn't even he wasn't even nice enough to let the cop get in his car and maybe go
He
first.
certainly
He'd
is.
just go right back to it.
I mean, he's the only booking office owner that I know of that ever missed an NWA convention. And the reason he missed it, I mean, I've got the letters to Sam Muchnick's office from the Nashville office saying we can't come to the NWA meeting because we got to go to the gubernatorial inauguration in Tennessee, and in Alabama. They went to both of those the same week that the NWA convention in September. I mean, you just didn't
business.
you didn't miss the NWA convention, but they knew that was more important to their business.
More important.
Yeah.
That's pretty bad. Pretty bad that it's more important than the NWA.
Well, the thing is and this, a lot of people don't understand this, and they were like, why weren't they covered more in magazines and things like that? I'm like, well, they didn't think it was important. They thought that their local programs that they had printed up for the arena was all the publicity they needed, and the live television shows that they were doing in all their markets. What was a magazine being published out of New York? How is that going to help? How's that help? Yeah, sure.
Hang on for me a second.
Yeah.
I got my batteries running low. Can I go and hook me up here, and we can pick it up?
And it was a philosophy that was picked up by the Fields in Gulf Coast and others. What was a magazine in New York? What good was that going to do them? I mean, it wasn't going to help them with their audience or with their crowds or whatever. So they weren't really that interested in getting publicity from magazines and such. They had their arena programs. They had their television show. That was all they really needed, right?
Yeah. Well, and they were doing something. They were always doing something other than just a straight little amateur wrestling match. You know, you had your angles, and they were getting guys over. They were working the angles, and my dad told me way back. I asked him. I said, I see Dad all these wrestling magazines. Why not you there? And he goes, we don't need them.
Yeah.
We don't know what good are they going to do us? I said, look at the crowd.
Well, we were talking a little bit ago about Dale Lewis, and we were talking about George McCreary and educating your audience on wrestling. I mean, your granddad was trained by a shooter, the original Dutch Mantell. He always had shooters around him. Sailor Moran, the original Green Shadow, Pat Malone, Charlie Carr. Danny Dusick. Yeah. And back in those days, and this is something that I don't think if you don't know your history, you really don't know this, but the way baby faces got over in the 40s and 50s and 60s was you took an ass kicking. I mean, the baby faces got beat up. Yeah. And I'm sure we don't really have evidence of it because people didn't know anything about head injuries and things of that nature, but I'm sure it contributed to your granddad's illnesses later in his life.
Yeah. I mean, no telling how many hard ways. I always think about that. My dad did two of them I know of, two big time. I'm sure not telling how many. He did one in Mobile with Mario Galento, and he did another one in Atlanta with Mario Galento. And, and Roy, somebody's got to bleed, right?
Right.
I mean, at some
point. All of them, took terrible beatings. I've got several photos of Roy, when he was in a pretty bad way. I was talking on the Briscoe and Bradshaw show the other day because we're doing the wrestling history of Texas, and we were talking about how it started in the carnivals and athletic shows. And your dad in 1959, little did people know that the two guys in the main event at that Russwood Park show, Billy Wicks and Sputnik Monroe, were both old carnival wrestlers. and two of the roughest, toughest shooters. I mean, that people are coming there, think they're going to a professional wrestling match, but those two dudes, and only your dad would book that,
Yeah.
where two tough, legitimate, tough dudes, where the match probably was 95% shoot, talking about the hard ways and all.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
that just ran in your family.
Yeah. And there was hard ways in that match.
Yeah.
The one you're mentioning there, and then when you do the big shows and you had the big blow-offs, it was time, and this is it. You got to, if you're ever going to do it, this is the night you're going to do it, right? So, yeah, I mean, they were a tough bunch of guys, man, that gave their heart and soul for their business.
You mentioned that match in Atlanta with Galento. I mean, that was a match that even your dad brought in Rocky Marciano, was it? That to referee that match?
Yep. Marciano refereed the match, and he got involved in the finish, which should have been, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
people came to see him, and they didn't expect that. But toward the end, Galento got out of line, and so they had Spider Galento. So Dad even threw in Galento had a manager which was not normally done. All of a sudden here's Al Galento, Spider down there, and in his corner the match, and Marciano ends up knocking out both of them before it's over.
Well, there again, I mean, this whole award at Waterloo this weekend is for your whole family. And your dad is one of the people, I think, much like Roy, who just doesn't get the credit that he should get as far as what he did in the wrestling business. I mean, the 2 years he was in Memphis, the years he was in Arizona, many people don't even know about that. The years he was in Georgia, my goodness, did they draw money in Georgia from 1966 through about 1972 when he and Lester swapped interests. He went to your dad went to Florida then and helped Eddie Graham draw money. Came back to Tennessee to look after your granddad's interests. I mean, your dad was later on partners with Jerry Jarrett in the Jarrett Welch Wrestling Company that a lot of people don't realize. That he was a partner in that breakup with Nick, and he just did a whole lot in the wrestling business, Ron.
Oh my goodness, and had some of the biggest events.
Knew how to promote wrestling.
Biggest crowds ever, in all those markets. Every one of them. Mobile, biggest ever. Loud Memorial.
Atlanta was in Ponce.
Atlanta.
It was in the Ponce de Leon baseball
there you go.
stadium.
Biggest ever in Atlanta. Biggest ever in Phoenix.
Yep.
Memphis, biggest ever in Memphis. Russwood Park.
We don't even know how many people were there.
Yeah. I was there, and I got to see it. And my dad never let us go, and let us watch that match that night. And wow, there must have been 10,000 people on the field standing, because all the bleachers were filled and all the ringside was full.
Your dad was.
The night they carried Billy Wicks with his car, picked up his Cadillac and carried him out of the stadium.
Out on Commercial Avenue.
The street out there. Wow. Yeah. I was like, as a kid, I watched that. This is amazing. Look at this. They're carrying him out of here in the car.
Your dad was an interesting fella because he was a main event star, big time babyface star, and he was loved by people, but he didn't like being in the public eye. He didn't like being on camera on television. He didn't like doing interviews. He was very much like Roy. He very much liked behind the scenes, but he was such a genius promoter. And we don't have a whole lot about it because he didn't put himself out there that much.
Yeah, he didn't.
He
never pushed himself. He never pushed himself.
Right.
And a lot of times when he went into his new territories and changed territories, he didn't go in as a wrestler. He went in as an owner.
Yeah, promoter.
And the promoter of it. And
yeah,
then he
several times
because he had to.
Several times
right?
in the Gulf Coast territory, he made somebody else the promoter for a short time while he went in the main event. And because the commission you had to do that. You couldn't wrestle and be a promoter.
Right.
So he would get somebody else in the promoter position. He'd do the main event match, draw a bunch of money, and then go back to being a promoter again.
There you go. He had it figured. He had it figured. He had a way he wanted to do it, and he never failed when he wanted to have a big one. It was always a big one, the biggest ever.
Probably
So,
of your uncles, Lester too. Herb and Lester were the wrestling workhorses really that worked a lot. I mean, Herb held that Southern junior heavyweight title for decades. Tell me a little bit about your uncles, Herb and Lester.
oh geez.
By the way, your Aunt
Lester,
Lucille, your Aunt Lucille just turned 100.
yeah, that's pretty crazy, isn't it? And I talked to Roy about it. I said, well, man, how do you take care of her? And he goes, I don't have to take care of her. I said, well, how does she do? You got to take her grocery store? No, she drives her herself to the grocery
You're talking
store
about Roy
and
Lee,
comes home and
right?
cooks the dinner.
You're talking
Right?
about
I said, she's 100 years old, Roy. How can she do that? He says,
amazing,
I don't know,
just
but she's
amazing.
still going. So,
Yeah, somebody was telling me the other day that she has not lost a step.
yeah, yeah, that's crazy. I mean, mine's just there. I mean, wow. I was like, wow, she's just a pretty amazing little deal there. So,
So I bet she would have some stories.
oh yeah, for darn sure. Lester was a great wrestler.
He
Lester
was.
was a great wrestler. Lester could fly a plane. Lester was a pilot, and he was a bona fide pilot. No telling how many thousands and thousands of miles Lester flew
Well, he
planes.
used to fly the main event guys around all the televisions on Saturday, right?
Yeah, had to before there was live shows. They were all live shows, and he would fly the main eventers from one city to the next TV station, and then in Florida he was running the. When I went to Florida, he was running the Bahamas and Puerto Rico, San Juan.
I know my dad. My dad knew Lester because my dad was very involved in the American Quarter Horse Association, and so was Lester. He was a big horse guy. So they knew each other
Yeah.
through that.
Oh, Lester's a big horse guy too, man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they knew each other through that AQHA association.
That's crazy. That's crazy,
Yeah,
Lester talked Dad into buying a rodeo.
yeah.
The whole thing, buy the whole rodeo. Dad said, hey, let's get us a couple of bulls. No, let's just buy the whole rodeo, right?
That was one of the proudest moments of my whole life, by the way, that I found out that Roy and Lester and Herb had a rodeo and you didn't know about it.
Yeah.
That made me so proud that I found something that you didn't
I
know.
never knew it. Yeah, I never knew it.
But
So,
your dad had one and you knew about your dad's rodeo.
oh yeah, yeah, it was right there. We lived on the farm where the rodeo arena was. Then, yeah, it was crazy. Lester was a great wrestler and so much of business. He was like business just like Dad was. Well, he won the Florida championship. He was the very first Florida champion. And he wrestled Sputnik Monroe in Jacksonville.
Mm-hmm.
And Monroe hard weighted him, both eyes. And but Sputnik told me this story. He said Lester's the toughest son of gun I ever saw, and he said I hit him, I busted him on right eye, and then he said he wasn't happy with it. It wasn't enough blood, and he says bust this other one, I bust my other eye. And he busted. He said I busted that eye, and then he said. And then he said he was all bloody down to his tights, and he said, and I didn't want to headlock him because he was so bloody. I would just get the blood all over my arms, and And he says I grabbed an ankle, and he said, and I took him down, and he said he looked up at me, he's bleeding, and he's got all this blood running down his face, and he screamed at me, he said, because the crowd's going nuts, and he screamed at me, he said, break it, break it. He says, I look at him, he's got two busted eyes, and he wants a broken ankle. He goes, my goodness, what kind of wrestler is this, right? So,
Wow.
I mean, Lester was a tough old son of a gun too, man.
You know, not long ago, I went down to Dyersburg. Still have wrestling there every Saturday night, and they have it in the building.
That place.
They have it in the building, the Herb Welch Wrestleplex.
Right.
And I met the mayor of Dyersburg. That he came by that night and said hello, and he wants me to come back to Dyersburg because he wants to take me around and show me a bunch of stuff, which I really want to do because I'd love to go out to the farm.
Oh, yeah.
And I bring all this up because Herb used to train guys. I mean, he was before there was wrestling trainers, Herb was a wrestling trainer.
Yeah. Yes. And he trained some of the best. He
Yeah.
trained some of the best. I mean, in fact, I don't know how many people know this, but I know he trained David Schultz.
He did.
He trained Wayne Ferris.
He did.
Who's related to Lawler.
Yeah, cousins. Yeah.
To Lawler, the Honky Tonk Man. He trained the Honky Tonk Man. He trained Coco Beware.
He did. He trained Randy Colley.
They're all Hall of Famers.
Yeah.
They're all three Hall of Famers.
One of the Moondogs, Randy Colley, trained him.
Yeah. I mean, and wow, I can't imagine what it was like to deal with him. I had a guy that wrote me a little story here one time, sent me a guy from over in that same area in Dyersburg, and he was a story about Herb. And he said, Ron, I don't know if you ever heard this story. He said, but I had a friend of mine that wanted to train to be a wrestler with Herb, and so he said. I said, well, how'd that go? And he said, the first time the guy went there, he got in the ring with Herb, and Herb just said, he said, just go on and hit me any way you can. Do anything you want to me right now, and then we'll start to teach you something, right? And he said, the guy didn't really want too much, but Herb said, come on. And so he said the guy took a couple of big swings, and then he took a run at him from across the ring. And Herb had his ring in a barn, and there was all dirt on it. Obviously, it wasn't concrete. Right. It was dirt outside when he went outside the ring. And he said Herb grabbed the guy was running at him. He just stepped aside, grabbed him by the back of the head, shot him between the first and the second rope, and the top rope, and out onto the floor, out onto the dirt. The guy hit on his belly. He said, my buddy was big and fat. And he said he hit on his belly, and said when he got up, he had dirt all over his belly. And so he said he got up, and he said he looked up there at Herb, and Herb says, he says, all right. He says, now you know. He goes, I'm the biggest, I'm the tallest hog at the trough. and they come on back in here, and we'll see what we can do something otherwise. And he said, my buddy turned around and said, hell no, I'm gone.
When I went down to Dyersburg, I just sat down on the bench there. I wasn't paying any attention or whatever. And there was an older guy there. He must have been almost 90. And he started talking to me, and he had seen the Briscoe Bradshaw series on Your Family.
Oh, yeah.
And he goes, oh, I knew Herb really well. He said, he tried to get me to be a wrestler. He said, I went out there for about a week, and I told him this is not for me. It didn't take him long to cull him out, I bet.
Oh, no. He was hard on him. Schultz and I was great friends, and Schultz works my territory. He's another guy that has great talent, and I was really lucky to get him. And Herb took care of him in the first workout. Schultz said when he got out of the ring to go home, he said, Ron, he said, I had to struggle to get out there and get in my car. Oh. And then he said, I drove home. And he said, when I got home, he said, I had to blow the horn. I just blew the horn, and I said, well, why'd you do that? And he said, because I couldn't get out of my car. My wife had to come and help me get out of the car to get to the house.
I bet. I bet Herb was right up there with some of the old football coaches like Bear Bryant and Adolph Rupp and people like that.
Oh
I bet
yeah,
put
yeah.
you through
Very
your
good.
paces. Did
Very
you know
good.
your Uncle Jack very well?
Jack, no, I met Jack a few times. Jack just showed up every once in a while. I think he was like that for everybody in the family.
He
He
was
just
hardest
kind of,
one for me to research.
he was just out of nowhere. He would show up and then he'd hang around for a couple hours and he'd gone to be gone for 3 years and he'd show up again,
Yeah.
And
He
he
used
had
to,
a wife. I think he trained his wife
well,
to wrestle.
he used to promote Poplar Bluff, Missouri, and he promote Blytheville, Arkansas, and some places like that for stretches, not for long periods of time. But he was the hardest one to find out much about.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he was not. I don't think he was right to be a wrestler. Somehow he just didn't fit
Yeah,
into that mold like Herb and
there were
Lester.
only there were only a handful of 4-man matches where all four of them were in the ring at the same
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
The Goldens. So Jimmy Golden's dad, Bill Golden, married your aunt, right? Married
right.
your
Ruby,
Roy's
yeah,
sister,
Ruby.
yeah, Ruby.
Right.
And I was really proud of what I was able to tell about Bill because I learned a whole lot from Jimmy about his dad that I don't think anybody had ever heard before about his World War II service, and he promoted the
He
heck.
became. He had such a horrible.
Yeah, he was in the Battle of the Bulge.
Yes, he was. He had seen so many horrible things
Yeah,
that it affected him the rest of his life.
yeah,
Really,
yeah, and he turned to drinking to
yeah.
compensate and cope with
But he was a wonderful guy.
oh my
He
gosh,
was a
and a brilliant
wonderful,
promoter.
wonderful guy.
He drew some amazing crowds in Louisiana. He drew crowds in Central Alabama.
Yeah,
He was a good wrestling promoter.
good promoter. Good
Learned
promoter.
how to promote under your grandfather Roy in
Yeah,
Dyersburg.
yeah.
Started out in the business in Dyersburg. He was another one that didn't really want to be in the ring, but really took to the booking side of things and the promotion side, and of course his
Roy found a
brother.
place for most all of them.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
he kind of found a place that a fit. If he ain't ready to be a wrestler, maybe he'll be a referee. You
Yeah.
can't referee? How about you try this? And, he wanted to include as many people as he could, I think. He
Yeah.
wanted
He
to,
did.
especially family members. I'm gonna find a spot for you. I'll find something for
Yeah.
you.
Bill married Roy's daughter, and so Jimmy is your cousin, and I think a lot of fans are real familiar with Jimmy Golden. But even Bill's brother Phil was in the business for a while
Right?
as
Yeah.
a promoter,
Promoter.
and then Roy's sister married Speedy Hatfield, and they had 3 sons who were in the wrestling business, and they used the fields. They shortened the Hatfield down to Field, and Speedy was quite a referee in
Yeah. Great
business.
referee.
Yeah, very well
Great
respected.
referee. Worked out perfect. And that I got some feels. I got a little field story for
Let's
you.
have it.
Okay. Uh, this was probably 19 late 50s, 58, maybe 1958. My dad had bought a farm and he bought a piece of property. It was just trees and, you know, he 300 acres. And then he wanted to clear it. He wanted to get rid of all the trees. And so he bought himself a bulldozer. Learned how to drive a bulldozer, learn how to handle a bulldozer. And then after we had knocked down all the trees and piled them up and burned the trash, we had a couple of stumps from these huge oak trees that he couldn't get rid of. His dozer couldn't push them over, turn them over.
Yeah.
And so he he was as goofy as he was. He went and bought cases of dynamite, okay, and then the caps to put into the dynamite, okay, and then we would dynamite those stumps, And wow, talk about dangerous, right? I
Oh,
mean,
sure. Yeah.
the actual stick of dynamite won't not dangerous, but the caps are pretty darn dangerous. They kill you if you drop them or whatever.
Yeah.
And so the Fields boys came to visit one day, and Dad had not shown the deal, so we had horses. We had a big ranch there, so we all got on horses, and Dad let me go with him, so I could carry the caps. That was
The most
always
dangerous thing.
the most dangerous thing. He took the dynamite, put it on the back of his horse, and then he handed me the caps. so, so we go out to the stump, a big stump, and all three of them, they're crazy guys, just like all wrestlers. They're little nuts, and maybe more than most. And so the dad's trying to explain to him, we walk over and he takes the dozer, and when he couldn't get the big stump, he would take the dozer and he'd go around the tree with it until he cut a big deep hole where you had to get down out into the hole and then down deep into the roots of the tree to explode them from underneath and blow them out. And so we went down and got off the horses, and we went all went down in the hole, and Dad's explaining to him how this works, and and they're just talking to themselves, and and they're not paying much attention in that. And I'm hearing the story. I'd heard it before. Well, you take the cap here, and he showed him how to crimp it onto the fuse. Then you put this into the dynamite, and normally we put one stick of dynamite into a tree, and he took three sticks because he wanted to do it. He wanted to get their attention.
Yeah.
So he took three sticks of dynamite. I watched him put the three sticks in, and put the in, and then he said to them all, he said, and he's trying to get their attention. They're just not, not listening. And he goes, now, this thing's going to blow, and it's going to be pretty big, and this fuse here, it's pretty short, I'd say 30 seconds, maybe 45, and then he lights it. And boy, when he did, I was already gone. I said, "Oh no, that's a short fuse, man. It's a lot shorter than that, right?" So I started out of there, and he crawled out of there, and he was running right with me, man. We were running like crazy, and I turned around and I looked, and they're fighting each other, throwing each other back in the hole. They're not even running to get away from it. And they're just throwing in and laughing and playing in there, right? And the old man hollers at him, man. He stops and he goes, "It's gonna blow!" and then they all hit the ground running. And when that dynamite went off, it blew a stump. It blew a stump as big as a car.
Wow.
300 feet in the air. And it blew all of them a flip, turned all of them a flip. So they were goofy as all get out, man, like all Welches. I guess they had all that in them.
Well, I just think it's amazing. I mean, there was not a bigger baby face than Roy Welch. There was not a bigger baby face than Buddy Fuller. There was not a bigger baby face than Lee Fields in the Southern Territories. I mean, it's just and then you and your brother and Jimmy. Just I don't know. There's something about you. I don't know what it is, but it's definitely there, and I'm just super thrilled. And I've talked to you about this many times, but I'm just really thrilled about this weekend. I'm really happy your family's getting this recognition. It's long overdue. I don't care about that. I'm just glad we're doing it now, and we're doing it at the what I consider to be the most prestigious wrestling Hall of Fame out there, which is the Tragos-Thesz Hall of Fame, which has professional and amateur. And Jerry Briscoe has brought so much. I mean, I'm not just saying it because he's my close friend, but he has worked so hard and has done such a great job bringing such prestige to that Hall of Fame. And this is this is one of the ways he's done it, is making sure that people get recognized that should be recognized.
Yeah. and he's bringing in a lot. There's a lot in this group. It's
Oh
not
yeah.
just me.
Well, another
There's a lot
family
that's going to be a lot
not
getting inducted other than me too.
not connected by blood, but definitely connected by association. The Jarrett family, and Jeff Jarrett will be inducted, and so it's Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama family reunion here. So we're excited about it.
Yeah, I am too, man. Looking forward to it.
And there's going to be a session. Bo James, my friend Bo, historian, is going to be doing a session with you and talking about your family. And so we'll be, for those who don't know as much about your family, we'll be educating them, and we'll definitely be honoring you. And I'm so glad Roy Lee is going to be there, and he's going to be doing my session with me. And
Good.
It's going to be a good weekend. I can't wait to see you.
So about time I shake your hand, man.
Yeah.
Instead of just looking at
Instead of doing this virtual stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, listen, thanks a bunch. I appreciate you spending some time with me today, and I'll see you this weekend in Waterloo.
All right. Thanks, man.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that visit with Welch family member Ron Fuller. Quite a life in professional wrestling. We did our 1976 review of the Southeastern Wrestling Territory. We talked about the Lou Thesz Award winners, the Welch family, who are going into the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame in Waterloo, Iowa, the Tragos-Thesz Hall of Fame, as a family group. And Ron will be there to receive that and to speak a few words about his family, and should be a wonderful, wonderful thing. I am so excited about the Welches getting their recognition for all that they've done to establish the sport of professional wrestling. I mean, right here in my home area, the Welch name and the Goulas name are synonymous with pro wrestling, because I mean, from the 20s and 30s and 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, on up through Jarrett Promotions. It's just it's a revered name around here, around these 4 or 5 state parts in Western Kentucky and Western Tennessee and Southern Indiana, Southern Illinois, Southeast Missouri, Northwest Arkansas. So many shows, so many wrestlers, so many great angles and storylines throughout the years. And so I'm excited about the Welch family going in. You know, I was thinking 40 years ago, in 1986, around this time, I remember on July the 3rd, one of my friends here in my hometown of Lola, Kentucky, where the Richards Ranch is located, one of my friends, Bobby Williams, I talked him into going with me on a little Great American Bash tour. And so we spent the 4th of July in Memphis, Tennessee, when Jim Crockett Promotions brought the Great American Bash to Memphis, to the Liberty Bowl. And the special music act as part of that show was Waylon Jennings. And so Bobby was my friend, and we ran around a lot together. They owned a ranch and a farm just down the road here. And I had a 1983 Mustang that would run like a crazy horse. And we drove that Mustang to Memphis on July the 3rd. We stayed at the Peabody Hotel in Memphis. I was in the broadcasting business at the time. I was in management of the company I was working for. I had a lot of connections in the music business, and I had talked a record. They would call you every week and pitch music to you, and try to get you to play their artist's music on your radio station. And I had this guy calling me, and he was always asking me if I needed anything or if I wanted anything. And I hardly ever took anything from these music people, because there's certain regulations and you can get in big trouble for it was back in the old days was called payola, where people on the air would get cash money for playing certain songs or giving some songs more airplay than others, and they'd get a little cash under the table for that. And highly illegal. The broadcasting business is federally regulated. And so anyway, I hardly ever took anything. And I think the statute of limitations is way past on this. But anyway, I told this guy, I said, I'm going to Memphis to an event, and I need a hotel room for a couple of days. And he's like, sure, baby, whatever you need, man, I'll get it to you, you know. So this guy put us in the Peabody Hotel for July 5th or July 3rd and 4th. Yep, July 3rd and 4th. We drove my Mustang down I-55. We went over to Missouri, got on I-55, drove down through Arkansas, went to Memphis, and went to the Great American Bash at the Liberty Bowl on July the 4th, 1986. The main event was Ric Flair defending the NWA World title against Nikita Koloff. Dusty and Magnum and Baby Doll had a six-man cage match with the Road Warriors and Dusty, Magnum, Baby Doll against Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express. There was a Wahoo McDaniel Jimmy Garvin strap match, which I mentioned to Jimmy last week. It was a great card. There were only like maybe 12 or 1,300 people. I mean, it's in this huge stadium there in Memphis, and hardly anybody at all. We were sitting second row ringside. I remember Dusty and Magnum coming down the aisle, and I was sitting on the end, and I reached out and touched Dusty Rhodes, and I reached out and touched Magnum, and I was afraid to touch Baby Doll. But I reached out and touched them. They went right by me. And, even though, and I want to say this, even though there were just a little over 1,000 people there, you would have thought there were 10,000 people there. I mean, the work and the show and the amount of intensity. I remember Black Bart had wrestled in one of the matches. And then after the match, he was sitting over in the dugout in his regular street clothes and had his hair pulled back in a ponytail, and he had turned over a bucket, and he was sitting on a bucket and chewing some tobacco. And I went over and talked to Bart. But that's a 40-year ago memory. And then I came back here to Kentucky, dropped Bobby off, and then I drove to Charlotte the next day, July the 5th. We drove back. Waylon Jennings played at the Bash in Memphis, and I remember that's how I got Bobby to go with me. He was a huge Waylon fan. So was I, and so we wanted to see Waylon and the wrestling. I wanted to see the wrestling. Bobby wanted to see Waylon, so he went with me. I drove him back here, dropped him off, and then I drove to Charlotte, North Carolina, to see the Great American Bash there, which the main event was the cage match with Ric Flair defending the NWA title against Ricky Morton. And great show. Tully Blanchard and Ronnie Garvin in a tape fist match with J.J. Dillon. And they did the whole gimmick at the beginning where Garvin knocks him out before the bell ever rings, and Dillon gets the bucket of water and tries to revive him. Just a great year for wrestling, and a great memory for me. I can't believe it's been 40 years since 1986. And then a couple weeks later, I drove to Greensboro to be there for the NWA title change, where Dusty won the title from Flair, and Dusty's third NWA title. And that crowd in Greensboro was crazy. So this crowd in Charlotte was as well. The crowd in Memphis, we were allowed small bunch. That we made as much noise as about 12 or 1,300 people could make, but in that large stadium. But it was still a great show, even though there were not many people there in Memphis, Tennessee, for the Crockett guys. The previous year, they had almost sold out the Mid-South Coliseum with a combination of Crockett guys and Jarrett guys in the 85 Bash on Tour thing. They did one in Memphis. They did one in Lexington, Kentucky. And it had a sellout. But then when Crockett tried to go in on their own in Memphis, I was one of the 12 or 1,300 people there. I mean, it just didn't work. Memphis was not interested in seeing a Jim Crockett only card. But in Charlotte and in Greensboro, my gosh, it was rabid and crazy. All right, so I want to also talk about this weekend at Tragos-Thesz Hall of Fame. I'm doing a special session, The Greatest Wars in Professional Wrestling. And my guests are going to be Greg Klein, who has a brand new book out, The Texas Wrestling Wars of the 1950s. And we're going to talk about the Wrestling War of the 50s as part of this session. And then my other guest is going to be Roy Lee Welch. from the Welch family. And we're going to talk about the Georgia Wrestling War from 1972 to 1974. And in 1972, Buddy Fuller, who was partners with Ray Gunkel, he traded his shares with his uncle Lester. Lester was in Championship Wrestling from Florida, and he was a shareholder down in Florida. And so they swapped. And I want to hear about this from Roy Lee, because this is the wildest and craziest thing I've ever heard. They swapped everything. They swapped their farms, their ranches. They swapped, I think they might have swapped vehicles. And they swapped their ownership shares. Lester got the shares in Georgia, and Buddy Fuller got the shares in Florida, and they relocated and crisscrossed. And that was about the time that the war broke out, and Ann Gunkel took all the wrestlers except two and started All South Wrestling. And the NWA office had two wrestlers in it in November of 1972. And they brought in Bill Watts to be the booker and started bringing in the NWA talent. And so we're going to talk about all of that at my session. And Roy Lee Welch was one of the admin people in the office. And I want to talk to him about it. And I'm excited about this. This should be a good session. And we're going to take questions and answers from our people who come to watch the session. So probably about 20 minutes on the Texas War, about 20 minutes on the Atlanta, Georgia War, and about 20 minutes worth of Q&A, I'm hoping, in this hour. So if you're coming this weekend, I hope you'll come. It's at 2:30 in the afternoon, Tragos-Thesz weekend at the convention building. And we'll be there from 2:30 to 3:30 talking about the greatest wrestling wars in wrestling history. All right, so now my guest is George Schire. We got some discussion today about the Pat O'Connor and Buddy Rogers 1961 match in Chicago, Illinois. I wrote two pieces on it last week for the Daily Chronicle and for the Evolution of Wrestling series for my paid subscribers, talking about the impact of this match and how it changed professional wrestling. And I also am going to talk about, George, about how I feel about the greatest 10-year period in the territory era was 1965 to 1975. That 10-year period was the most prosperous, strongest, and best period during the territory days. And I want to talk to George about that. I want to talk to him about the award that I'm getting this weekend, the James C. Melby Award. George was best friends with James Melby. They were instrumental in establishing this award in the Hall of Fame. And I want to talk to George about all of this stuff. So let's go to that visit at the Richards Ranch right now and my dear, dear close personal friend, George Schire. And I also am going to throw George off with a little curveball surprise during the interview. So be sure and watch for that as well. Let's go to that right now. Here's my talk with George Schire. Always a pleasure to welcome back to the program my good, close personal friend and frequent analyst here on the show, George Schire. George, how you doing today?
Tony, I am doing absolutely great. I am excited about our show today and everything you just said, close personal friend. I mean,
Yep.
You and I met briefly in person, but we're going to fix that this coming week. And
almost a year ago.
A year ago, yeah. And I bumped into you by accident.
Yeah, this weekend will be an exact year or close thereof of meeting at last year's Tragos-Thesz, and I was so honored you drove down for the show just kind of to see me and say hello, and I got to meet you and your lovely wife, and you guys are going to be with me this weekend at the Tragos-Thesz Hall of Fame weekend, and I'm excited, man.
That's an honor for me, my friend. Seriously.
A couple of things I want to talk about today, one of which is the award, the Melby Award that I'll be getting, and the other is we just passed the 65th on June 30th. It was 1961. It's 65 years ago that the Pat O'Connor, Buddy Rogers record-breaking gate was set at Comiskey Park in Chicago. And I know you had been a fan at that point for just a couple of years, right?
Yeah. About 2 or 3 years, yeah.
2 or 3 years. So I know you were aware of it because magazines were plastered all over the place with that story. I've got the wrestling. I think I've got the Wrestling News and maybe Wrestling As You Like It and a couple others that put out special issues about this match. What do you remember about the O'Connor and Rogers match?
Well, I think you touched on a couple of things already, Tony. First of all, I think it received all the attention it did, more mainstream attention than a lot of other previous title changes, etc., took place. But this one I think was big because, first of all, it was a historic attendance taking place in an outdoor ballpark, Comiskey Park in Chicago. And they had like 38,600 plus people there, which for wrestling. And there are pictures available. In fact, one of the pictures, if any fan wants to look, is on the back of the Wrestling Review photo album with Buddy Rogers on the cover, a beautiful shot of Buddy on the cover. The back cover is a color shot, and I mean, it's a full shot of the Comiskey Ballpark with the ring on home plate, and it is full. That stadium was full. There was no doubt that the 38,000 plus that they announced was accurate. And it also was monumental because it was one of the biggest gates at the time.
Yeah.
Gross receipts were like 142,000 plus.
141,000, yeah, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, and put that in 1961 dollars, that was huge. So definitely mainstream. And then the other thing was, and I think you and I are going to touch on this, it was monumental because in a roundabout kind of way, this was going to start kind of a clash between the traditional NWA and the East Coast promotion.
Yeah, right.
The card was promoted by Fred Kohler, who was the main guy in Chicago at that point, and instrumental in wrestling, a phenomenal promoter. And
he actually had been the president of the NWA for a little while
yes.
when this happened. And one of the brief times that Sam Mushnick was not the president.
Right. And then we should point out that the other promoter, the co-promoter, was Vince McMahon Sr., who, if during the broadcast here I mentioned, say, Daddy Vince, that's what I always call him. So
sure, yeah.
It's not a derogatory. It's just that he's senior. But Vince Sr. was the co-promoter. And I think, long story short, Tony, I think we could admit that was the influx of what was going to we're going to be looking at for the next couple of years, with Pat O'Connor losing and Buddy Rogers becoming the new champion. It was almost like the NWA lost hold on their champion.
Well,
their championship.
It was the first time a heel had been the NWA champion. They always went for the real pure wrestlers.
Yeah,
I know in 1955 when the Dumont put on a studio wrestling show in New York City, Lou Thesz went to a 60-minute time limit draw on television in New York City with Pat O'Connor. I think O'Connor had been in the business about 4 years. They were obviously already thinking of him on that level of being the champion at some point. And so Thesz, I think, really liked O'Connor and wanted to really elevate him. And so they went to a draw that took up the whole hour-long studio television show in New York with Thesz and O'Connor. They still never really drew that well in New York. The NWA champion didn't, but they were really trying.
Well, and when you mentioned about they were probably already looking at O'Connor in 1955, I should point out that Vern Gagne also wrestled against Pat O'Connor around that same time period. And they not only teamed together, but they also wrestled each other a few times. And I think it's safe to say, when you said that he was a pure champion, we know that the formula for the NWA champion was usually a popular wrestler, but he had to be somebody that could go into a town and not play a heel, but be the subtle heel against possibly the local territory's number one guy that is the babyface.
And he had to be a wrestler. You know, he
exactly.
had somebody who wrestled
right.
at a very high level, which
right.
was a change with Rogers.
Oh yeah.
because he was more of a performer. He was not
Yeah.
as much of a pure wrestler. And of course, as I mentioned, he was a heel, which was not what the NWA champion ever had been before.
Which was the problem when you say he was a more of a performer, because we know that Lou Thesz was always very vocal about the fact that he didn't want the title or appreciate that the title was on, as he called it, a performer versus a wrestler. And I know it's probably jumping ahead just a bit, but when it came time for Buddy to lose the title, of which McMahon, etc., they didn't want this, and Lou Thesz was going to win it. And he basically, this has been out there for years. He said to Buddy, we're going to do this tonight, and we can do it the easy way or we can do it the hard way. Meaning basically, Buddy, you're going down and don't play games.
Well,
And Lou was the guy that would have made it happen if he didn't want it to happen.
we know that in a car ride from Louisville, Kentucky to Evansville, Indiana, back in the, I guess it was in the late 40s or early 50s, Buddy Rogers said some very derogatory things about Ed Strangler Lewis.
Yeah.
And Lou Thesz never forgot that, because Strangler Lewis was Thesz's hero, and he was the guy who had trained Lou. And so that's where his disrespect for Buddy really started. And Thesz and Rogers had sort of been on this parallel track. Thesz was the Texas champion in '36. Rogers was the Texas champion, I think, a year or two after that. And Thesz had been the successor to Tom Pax as a promoter in St. Louis. Rogers is the guy that helped Muchnick win the war in St. Louis when he came in. And eventually Thesz sold out his booking office to Muchnick's booking office. The Mississippi Valley Sports Club and the St. Louis Wrestling Club essentially merged.
Sure.
And I think so. There were just several things between Lou and Buddy that were not on the good side of things.
Well, and the thing about Buddy Rogers is yes, we agree he was a performer. He could draw money. He was great on the mic. You loved to hate him just with his arrogance. And he was good in that respect. But I went back and I started looking at Buddy Rogers' one-loss record, and I do have, with any one-loss record, it's probably 90% finished, because there's always some result out there from podunk someplace. But I've got Buddy's record, and if I look at it, when I did look at it through the NWA championship years, I think a lot of the ribs started right there, because if you look at the defenses, the title defenses, it is really overloaded with a lot of East Coast title defenses.
Oh yeah.
Being Philadelphia, New York City, Atlantic City, New Jersey, etc. Up and down. You could throw Toronto in there on the East Coast, but
which we should remind fans that there was no WWF.
Right.
That Northeast corridor was an NWA territory.
Right. It was an NWA territory, and Vince Sr., I'm going to try to call him Vince Sr. He was a member of the National Wrestling Alliance, and he actually was doing a lot of the booking for Buddy Rogers.
Yes.
Buddy was his guy. Right. And showman or nothing, I mean, he liked him.
Well, I think that was another bone of contention. I think Toots Mondt was actually doing a lot of booking of Buddy, and Toots and Lou had heat going back years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Way back. And so I think as you go through the 2 years, or what, it was 63 when Lou finally took the title from Buddy. So he had it for a couple years. But the problem was that it got harder and harder for Muchnick or any other promoter to actually solidify dates for Buddy, because it was always Daddy Vince that was behind the scenes pulling the plug. And that's where it came in, where they went to Lou. And that was the old policeman story at that point, I think. Lou was the guy they went to more often than not for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And they basically went to him and said, we want the title back.
So let me just throw this in, and then I got a question for you. So the other little layer of political intrigue that was going on is that in 1958, Doc Sarpolis had maneuvered Dory Funk Sr. into the NWA World Junior Heavyweight title for just a couple of months. That was typically on Danny Hodge or on Savoldi or one of those guys. But he got a run for Senior, thinking that he would be able to get the world title for Senior. And it was getting close to that turn there. And as a matter of fact, when Kohler stepped out and left the presidency, Doc Sarpolis became president of the National Wrestling Alliance. And I always thought that, and Sarpolis had been instrumental, of course, because he controlled the Texas title. And he's the one that put the title on Rogers and was so instrumental in Rogers' success in Texas. But he was not happy with the Buddy Rogers choice. He wanted the title on Funk Sr., and that led to heat in Texas for years.
Well, in the Amarillo territory, which I know you are a historian buff on, and you mentioned Doc Sarpolis. Yeah. I never pronounce his name right. I apologize. Sarpolis. But when Buddy was champion,
he went with a different guy.
He refused to recognize Buddy in Amarillo, and he actually recognized Gene Kiniski.
Yeah, they created their own title.
Champion.
Yeah.
So, and I think that points out what we want to say about how it changed wrestling, because Buddy was one of those guys where he seemed to have controversy surrounding him. He could draw money, but it went with a price, if you want to say that. And people had a lot of dealings with him, good or bad, that you get to the point where you say, I don't want to deal with this anymore.
Well, he liked using his own guys. He traveled with his own little group of guys that if you booked Buddy, you pretty much had to book another 5 guys.
Right. And, I think there were promoters that were always quick to do something if they could. I actually pulled this out before our show today. I've got the programs there's that incident that took place on November 29th of 1962 when Buddy Rogers, they put quotations on it, broke his ankle in Montreal against Killer Kowalski. But Buddy legitimately didn't wrestle for several weeks. And Morris Siegel, the Houston promoter at the time, actually in his programs announced, I don't know if this can show up here, but he announced that they are recognizing Killer Kowalski as the new world champion, that he defeated Buddy Rogers in Montreal. And for the next several weeks, Kowalski is not only defending the title, but then at the end of the year, they actually had Killer Kowalski defend, and they listed as the NWA world title against Lou Thesz. And then eventually when Buddy came back, things were worked out. But Morris Siegel was looking for a way to not use Buddy, and Killer Kowalski was a good choice.
One of the things I was going to say too is that I'm often asked, what were the best years of the territories, and it's always a little jarring to people, but I think 1965 to 1975 were the biggest years. That 10-year period of time, from 65 to 75, and I think this 1961 match at Comiskey Park sort of was ushering in that stretch of time. You had more territories than at any other time in the territory era history during that 10-year period from 65 to 75. And after 75, after Sam Mushnick stepped down as the president, things started fragmenting, and offices started closing, and the champions started getting booked different. And I know that people think they've seen everything on video of the territories, but you're actually seeing the slow death of the territories when you watch video. Back during the time when you were a young fan, and you've got all the programs from that, most of the programs from that stretch of time from 60. I mean, would you agree with that would have been the strongest time for the territories?
I don't think you're at all wrong with that, and I do agree. The thing is, when you look at what happened, things started to really fall apart, I think, in 57 when we had the Lou Thesz Carpentier
Yeah.
situation where there was the break off of some of the promoters recognizing Carpentier. And Tony, we know that the NWA went along with that for a while. And then they decided, well, we're not going to recognize Carpentier, and he didn't even show up in their listings. But he
Well,
had a legitimate claim.
I think that was exasperated by the wrong choice of Hutton also.
Well, that's probably true. We've never argued that even though Lou Thesz campaigned heavily for Dick Hutton, who on the surface was a hell of a good wrestler. You want a worker and a guy that could shoot. Dick was the guy.
Oh.
But he was as boring as watching your grass grow.
Oh,
he just was.
The problem was that now the biggest instrument for promotion was television.
Yes.
And Dick, if Dick had been champion pre-television, I think he would have had a great run.
Mm-hmm.
But having to be charismatic on television, that was not Dick. And I just think that promoters came to sort of lose confidence in the title and lose confidence in the NWA through the choice of Hutton. Then you have on top of that the Carpentier break off. I think that you're right. I think that really damaged things.
So that starts to fragment in 57, although there was a little break in 1955 out in San Francisco when Leo Nomellini technically beat Thesz for the NWA title, and that wasn't recognized either. But if you look at 57, 58, 59, things were changing. We know that Vern Gagne broke off, and he was there in 1960, so the AWA is on board. We know that in 63, and this is probably more discussion we can have, but that's when the start of what was going to become the WWF. And then in 64, we had the Bruisers group, the Indianapolis group, a smaller promotion, but certainly could lay claim to a world title. And we had the West Coast version at that time.
Well, I think you're right.
In the LaBelle promotion.
I think you're right, because who did McMahon name as his first champion?
Buddy Rogers.
Buddy Rogers.
Yeah. Well,
and then of course, he set about the whole thing of, well, Buddy still has the NWA kind of on him, and he's got that stink on him, so I'm going to create my own new super champion, which was Bruno. But you're right. I mean, that whole controversy over who was going to control and book the champion, I think McMahon got a little taste of doing that with Buddy, and that's when he decided I'm going to do my own thing.
Now, one of the things that we've heard through the years, about the Bruno and Buddy Rogers match, I don't know where I've ever been on this, if I take it all in as fact or not, but the stories, of course, that Buddy had some heart issues and had been in the hospital and had done that 17, what was a nanosecond match that he had with Bruno to lose the title, right, that he had come in out of the hospital, etc. And again, I don't know if that's true. I just know it's been the story told forever. And Buddy was done, Bruno. And Bruno, they started grooming him, if you want to get serious about it. They started grooming him about 1960.
Right.
Where the strong man, and we all know that he went over so well in that part of the country that I don't think there was anybody at that time that could have done what Bruno did for the Worldwide Wrestling Federation.
Do you remember if there was, of course, days, it's hard for a lot of people to imagine this, not for you and I, because we grew up in this time period, but you only pretty much had network television at the time. Do you remember if there was very much television coverage of the Chicago match?
No, I don't recall anything, Tony. And again, by that time in 63 or 61, 61, I would have just been shy of my 10th birthday by a few months. So I'd have been 9 years old.
But I mean, think about how enthusiastically positive the whole country was at that time.
Yes.
I mean, when Kennedy got elected president, it was like it was a golden era in the United States.
Yeah.
And you have these two fantastic athletes in O'Connor and Rogers meeting. Rogers, the flamboyant, strutting heel, and O'Connor, the the New Zealander who could really wrestle, and this hype that they built up around this entire extravaganza in Chicago was just, for the time, they did a fabulous job of promoting. As a matter of fact, in one of those stories I've written in the last week in the Chronicle, I had a photocopy of the Chicago newspaper that said they may draw 59,000.
Yeah.
That came out about a week before the match.
Well, and we know that in 1959, that was when Vern kind of officially withdrew from the NWA in late 59. But I can tell you that Vern Gagne, he was an advocate for Pat O'Connor as well. They were friends outside the ring. Mm-hmm. And I told you they had wrestled, they had teamed.
Well, honestly, George, I can't remember anybody ever saying one bad thing about Pat O'Connor.
No. And Vern was always positive with him. And the other thing was, as I noticed in one of the things that you'd written this week, and you'd mentioned Pat O'Connor getting some training, or getting a lot of his training from Butch Levy. Yep. Here in Minnesota. I would point out to you that it was also Joe Pazentak was involved. Right. With he's one of the guys that can take credit for bringing Vern into the business, but Joe and Butch Levy, they were the two guys, and it was Tony Stecker, the then Twin Cities promoter, when Pat O'Connor broke in. It was Tony Stecker that brought him here from New Zealand, so he was kind of a Minneapolis guy. Yeah, Pat O'Connor was, and he got a huge push. If you look at Twin City programs during the 50s, and it was NWA territory in those years. Most of those years, Thesz was the NWA champ, but O'Connor got a lot of push in the Twin Cities, and that had to do with Tony Stecker, Vern Gagne, etc. So he had his backers, absolutely.
I'm glad you brought that up. Let me ask you this question. Did you ever talk to Vern, because I know you had conversations with him, did you ever talk to him about the angle that they ran where they challenged Pat for the title, but they knew Pat wasn't going to show up and Vern was going to get the – I mean, did you ever talk to Vern about doing that? I mean, he thought so much of O'Connor, but he sort of positioned him as a no-show for that match. For the title,
and that's a topic that I personally have talked about so much over the years. But yes, the whole thing with Vern on that, Tony, is when Vern and Wally Carbo pulled away from the NWA, they basically pulled away as early as the fall of 1959. But O'Connor was the recognized NWA champion, and I can tell you 100% from what Vern stated was that fictitious challenge that the Wally Carbo and other promoters, as they described it, they were going to issue this challenge to the NWA and to its champion, Pat O'Connor. And it basically, as we've talked, was a 3-month challenge, 90 days. But I can tell you 100% that before that challenge was ever issued, and it was, I guess we have to say it was a TV and a program, a wrestling paper program challenge, because that's where we heard about it and read about it. And there was, Sam Muchnick, etc. They had already given up Minneapolis. There was no intent. It wasn't even a real challenge. It was for drama. And, when you look back at it, it was a lot better than proclaiming that Vern Gagne won the title in Rio de Janeiro and came back, like these fictitious phantom matches. They legitimately built him up to become the champion. And yes, in a way, he was burying his friend Pat O'Connor.
Well, that was what I was wondering.
Pat was okay, but they were okay with this. This was a wrestling story.
Did they talk about it at all? Do you know?
Vern and Pat?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure they did. I don't know for a fact, but I'm sure they did. Pat had no animosity. In fact, after that,
I just can't imagine them not talking about it. I can't imagine Vern not going to Pat and say, hey, as part of this whole deal with us breaking away from the NWA, we're going to do this challenge. We're going to use your title. And I just can't imagine them being such close friends and them not saying something.
Well, and let me show you, they were close friends because after Vern got the title in 1960, if you flash forward to later in 61 or 62, well, actually, it was a little bit later than that, 63. But Pat O'Connor was in and out of the Twin Cities. He'd come in and work a card, and Vern had him always on top. I mean, they were this was only a storyline. And the one thing I've always looked at is I thought that was a genius storyline because it gave legitimacy to Vern Gagne getting the title. And later on, I could probably dig out one of the programs where it says that Pat claimed he wasn't aware of the booking challenge as he was busy traveling around and defending the title, and he wasn't aware. And so the whole storyline is, I think it made it seem real, at least in my way of looking at it. That too. The champion and Sam Muchnick didn't. And I've got a photo, and I've never published this because I don't want people making copies of it. I'm really selfish here, but I have an 8x10 glossy from the Minneapolis Wrestling Club, and I will share it with you sometime.
Okay.
But it is basically when Vern is naming himself as champion, Wally Carbo was in the middle, and Sam Muchnick is presenting him with the AWA belt. There you go.
Yeah. Wow.
With the blessings of the NWA. It was, the whole thing was a work, and I just think it was a good way because we flash forward to when you mentioned when Daddy Vince put Buddy Rogers as the WWF champion.
Yeah.
Didn't they say that Buddy had won the title in Rio de Janeiro or something?
That was usually where they win them. Yeah.
And see, I look at those, and you try to find a result for that. There is none because there was no match.
It didn't happen.
So in the case of Vern and Pat at the time, I think this was a way to do it where none of them really got hurt and they could remain friends. And Vern was still a member of the National Wrestling Alliance right up to the end. Right. He went to their annual meetings and he wrestled, in St. Louis.
Well, I think
his guys worked in St. Louis. So
the more I've studied it and the more I've read the correspondence and the stuff around the consent decree and all of that, I can't help but think that Sam thought this was a good thing.
Yeah,
like I think
he thought
he thought Minneapolis breaking off to do its own thing was a good thing for the NWA and for the taking some heat off.
Well, and a couple of years earlier, our friend Hornbaker, he talked about this really well in his Unholy Alliance book, but there was heat on the National Wrestling Alliance just a few years earlier for actually being a monopoly back in those days and, monopolizing the business. So this was a way for them to take the heat off there too.
Well, I was on another show here a couple of weeks ago and the topic of Tom Renesto came up. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about Tom Renesto and I said, Tom was a witness for the government in the DOJ investigation of the National Wrestling Alliance. And they're like, no, we didn't know that. And I said, wow. Yeah, he was, what was his, Tony Martin, I think.
Tony Martin, I just posted a picture on your page of him in Texas.
So he wrestled as Tony Martin also in the Crockett territory.
Right.
And he would drive Mr. Crockett. And there were several meetings and discussions that he was privy to that came out in this testimony. And Mr. Crockett did some things to lower his risk, let's say,
right,
for business invasion in the Crockett territory. He did a few things, and I think all promoters did a few things back in those days.
Well, and when you said earlier that between 65, 64, 65, and through 1975, and you feel that's probably the best territory
That's
time,
the best
I
10-year
think
period, I think.
best 10-year period. And I couldn't agree with you more because that was when I want to say we really had the most peace in the business,
Hmm.
where each of the individual territories, and if you looked at the magazines back then for what they were worth in their publishing at the time, because a lot of that was all kayfabe and made up, but in their ratings or rankings, it was always the WWA in California and Bruisers Indianapolis WWA and the Tri WF and the NWA and then Vern AWA. And there was peace and cohesiveness between all these promoters. And Tony, they really did during that 10-year period, maybe 10 or 12 years, they did work together. People don't realize that
Well, I think
they
I think
literally,
that I think that period of 1955 to 1965 really put the fear of God into them. I
yeah,
really think they thought they were
yeah,
going to lose the business. I think
right,
they thought the government was really going to break up this wrestling thing.
right.
And
And by working together and being friendly with one another, exchanging talent from time to time, it made the business, as we look back on, at least I do, it is probably the best 10 or 12 years of the territorial time.
yeah, and we don't have a whole lot of tape on it.
Oh, heavens, no.
Thankfully, we do have the 61 match. We do
Yeah,
have it. We have all three falls, which I still look at that going, this might be the perfect pro wrestling match, this O'Connor and Rogers match. I mean, it had everything. You had a submission by the champion in the first fall,
yeah,
and then you had the champion come back and win the second fall. And then in the third fall, it's anybody's ball game.
right.
And you watch it today, if you've seen it before, it doesn't have the same effect. But if you go a couple of years and you haven't seen it and you watch it again, I watched it again before I wrote my piece the other night. I was on the edge of my seat, and I know
Yeah,
what's going to happen.
right, right. Well, and see, you and I are old breed on that because we could sit down and watch that type of a match 2 out of 3 falls, and we're going to be glued to our screen the whole time on pins and needles, even if we have seen it 10 times. But the I
The
I don't think
hesitancy.
fans today have that attention span.
One of the things that struck me, and it catches me every time I'm not watching for it, and then all of a sudden it's on my screen, is the hesitancy of the ring announcer to announce that Rogers won the first fall. Like
Yeah,
he keeps looking at the timekeeper at ringside going, "Are you sure he won the fall?" And I'm just
yeah,
like, man, they were kayfabe to the end. I loved
yeah.
it. I loved it.
And it's quite possible they didn't know for,
No, I'm sure they didn't know.
that's the other side of it. The announcer probably really in those days, he was probably not brought into to
And
the
the
circle.
and the interview at ringside with Wild Red Berry and the Kangaroos, and
Yes.
they don't know anything that's going on. I mean, they're totally they don't know who to say they think is going to win. I mean, you
Uh,
can tell by their comments they're not rehearsed or they hadn't really thought about it, because they don't
well, and,
they
and
kept the
and
finish from everybody.
there you talk about the magic of kayfabe era when a lot of people weren't in it, only those involved,
Right.
and that put the realism into
Sometimes not
it.
even the referee.
No, sometimes no. I mean, later on, we know that referees a lot of times could carry the finish to a match, or have the finish for the boys in the ring. But
But
yeah,
I mean,
probably in this instance,
a lot of times the boys got the finish when they came to the ring,
yeah, yeah,
when the referee came over to check them.
yeah. And that's one of the things I've learned over the years when I've talked with wrestlers, when we talk about their interviews back in the day or what was going on. I've had many of them say, Tony, gee, I didn't know until the night of the match that this was going to happen or this was what we were going to do, you know. And they'll even throw in sometimes that we were working, we wanted to get paid, and that was my job, and so hey, we just did it, man.
So I mean, I was just thinking about this just this morning, but it's one of my favorite stories of all time. The NWA title changed hands in Miami in December in '75, and Terry Funk beat Jack Briscoe.
Yeah.
And Jerry Oates is supposed to have a match with Briscoe the next night in Kansas City. And in those days, Jack was a babyface champion, so he went to the babyface dressing room. Jerry Oates is getting nervous. He's like, where's Briscoe? Like, he's not here. I'm supposed to be in the main event with him. And then about halfway through the card, somebody comes in and goes, well, Jack's not going to be here tonight. And Briscoe goes, or Oates says, really? Why? He goes, well, he lost it to Terry. Terry Funk's in the heel dressing room. You've got a match with him.
Yeah. And let's point something out for fans that don't know this. In those days, it was actually spread by word that the new champion would immediately take over the old champion's bookings.
Yes.
So if there were a month's worth of bookings out there, well, that now was on Terry Funk. You know, that's the way it worked.
And I think back then, and they had originally intended Harley to be the next champion because the next night was booked in Kansas City. And I think Harley was going to go home for that week. But Terry had to pick up his bookings, and he was not in the same dressing room as Jerry, of course, because he was a heel. And Jerry finds out 2 matches before the world title match that he's not even facing the guy he thought he was going to face.
Which, again, adds so much realism to the business.
I love it. I wish it was still this way.
Oh, man. You know, just the way you say that, it just makes it real. I was going to ask you this, and this is a tad off topic, but since we mentioned Briscoe Funk.
Yeah.
You talk with Gerald Briscoe a lot.
Yeah.
Have you ever discussed with him the rivalry between him and Jack and Dory and Terry?
Oh, yeah.
And so did he ever give you a take on the whole Harley-Dory match and the tractor accident and et cetera that took place?
Oh, yeah. And I interviewed him for over a couple of hours for my book.
Okay.
You know, I think what really upset the Briscoes the most was that it wasn't necessarily the delay or anything, but what really upset them was that in those days, if you were going to be getting the title, you went around to all the territories before you got the title and you got beat.
Yeah.
And so Jack had done that. He had gone around to all the territories. He had done all the jobs. He had put all the local challengers over that would be his first challengers when he got the title. Then he didn't get it. Harley got it. Yeah. And that really, really bothered them. I mean, that's what added heat to it. I think they were kind of upset because Eddie was upset because he and Dory Sr. were really good friends, and Eddie knew it was all BS. I mean, he knew it was a work. He knew that the pickup truck accident was a work. And that was frustrating because there wasn't anything he could do about it, you know.
Right.
They were very frustrated, but it didn't preclude their friendship at all.
Right.
I mean, they stayed friends for years, still are friends.
Well, and the reason it's funny that you mentioned it the way you did, because I had a chance with Jack a few years before he passed. He was at Cauliflower Alley, and I sat with him about 2 hours one night up at the bar. We had a couple beers together, and Jack was very open and talked about that. And he mentioned that very same thing that you just said about he had went around and I knew this because I had see results and things with, I was already working on results and stuff. And he says, I went around and I put people over, and with the anticipation or the, that I was going to be the champion, and then it didn't happen.
Yeah, he was building his first round of matches. I mean,
right.
When he comes back with the title, everybody's like, well, our guy beat him last time.
And that's beautiful promoting.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the champion comes in and your guy has already scored a win over him. I mean, that sells tickets right there.
And, of course, Bosch was all mad because he had been promised a title change. And, it just there was just everybody involved with it was upset.
Although I will tell you that when Jack did get the title from Harley in July of '73, and it was in Houston, you mentioned Paul Bosch, that was choreographed. I mean, I think even a blind person could have figured out that Jack was going to get the title that night from Harley because they had put together this beautiful souvenir album and all the advertising in the papers and TV and everything. That one was really heavily promoted to take it from Harley.
Well, of course, Harley is no longer with us, so can't talk to him about it. But I did talk to his former wife, and she told me that Mr. Barnett had called just a couple of days before and worked out a deal with Harley to do the mailman thing, to carry it from one place to one person to the other. But I mean, Harley and the Funks had a long-standing. I mean, there was just so many relationships that were involved there. Geigel had been a star in the West Texas territory, was a champion with the Funks. Harley had basically broken in down there.
Yes, he did.
Taking Happy Humphrey around. He was, when Dory Jr. won the title in 1969, Papa Funk wanted to travel. So they hired Harley to be one of their first bookers that they ever had in West Texas, so that Daddy Funk could go with Junior. And
geez, now you're doing the daddy thing, Papa Funk, Daddy Funk.
Well, it's
Daddy
easier
Vince.
to say than senior, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
And no, sometimes I get my juniors and seniors messed up, so it's easier.
Right. That's why I always say Daddy Vince, because it clarifies it. So, but I think we've been talking about Buddy Rogers, and I just think, one of the other things we talked about, there was controversy during that 2 or 3 year run for Buddy. We know the famous locker room story with Carl Gotch and Dr. Bill Miller. They had some issues, and Buddy missed matches, whether he canceled them on his own or they canceled them or whatever, but he did not wrestle the night that he was scheduled on that card. I think he was scheduled against Johnny Barron, which was kind of a friend of his in a way over the years. And they never wrestled. That locker room incident took place. And the story goes that Dr. Bill and Carl Gotch kind of beat him up a little bit.
Roughed him up, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about...
I think Buddy had his detractors, but a hell of a draw. I mean... Well,
it's not that we didn't have blonde heels before Buddy, but by putting the title on one, that was very much a departure for the National Wrestling Alliance. And
I think we can end with this on the Buddy thing, because we had touched on it briefly. Sure. I think one of the things that became a real contention towards the end of Buddy's run is that, and again, I pointed this out by looking at results, the NWA was getting less and less of their city dates, and there were more and more East Coast oriented dates. And that had to be the Daddy Vince influence. Yeah. And I think that's where they finally decided, you know what, we're going to get a hold of Lou and we're going to do business. Yeah. And I think that's what happened.
And McMahon Sr. Tried to make a Thesz and Sammartino match after that. Because I still think he coveted that NWA title. I think he wanted it.
Which was weird, in the 70s, they actually backed out of the NWA for a number of years.
Yeah, they sure did.
I mean, they were recognizing, they were recognizing the NWA champion. I correct myself here. And they did not call Pedro Morales the world champion.
No, they didn't even call Bruno the world champion. As a matter of fact, there were some Madison Square Garden programs that had Jack's picture in them. As the world champion.
Yeah.
All right. So listen, this weekend in Waterloo, it's one of the biggest honors I've ever, and I've had some things happen to me in my life. I've been very blessed to have a lot of things happen, but this is very special to me. And it's the James C. Melby Award, and it recognizes excellence in professional wrestling journalism, writing, or historical preservation, and it highlights individuals who've advanced the sport through accurate documentation or high standards or preserving wrestling history in some way. And it's named after a very close friend of yours, James C. Melby. And you were very nice to send me 3 books that you have authored and put together on the AWA records of the 60s and 70s. And every one of the books you sent me, to your credit, has a handwritten note on the end. And you sent all three of them at the same time, but you sent a note in every one of them. And in the 1975 to 79 book, I think it is, in the introduction, you document how you and Mr. Melby met and your trips that you took together. And he had the publications like the Wrestling News, the Wrestling Review, Wrestling Monthly, under the same publishing as Kaiser. And he also edited Vern Gagne's Pro Wrestling Report for a while, and he had a couple of books out. Tell us about your friendship and the story of you and James Melby.
I want to start by saying that you getting this award, and you've just listed all of the criteria and everything that leads up to you being recognized and honored with this great prize. It is extremely important for me because I did know Jim so well, and the award is named after him. And Tony, it's named after him for a reason. Some people have heard this story, but I met Jim when I was 17 years old back in 1968, and Jim was 19. We were both kids. We lived in the same city, and we started going to the Twin Cities matches together. We had both been fans since about 1960, so we had about the same tenor of following the AWA at that point in time. And Jim introduced me to something that up to that point I hadn't even thought of as being important, and that was compiling wrestlers and territories results. And I remember Jim and I had a discussion, why is this important? And he told me, he said, you look at a wrestler's won-loss record and it tells you the story of his career. You can see when he started in the business, he was, putting others over in openers on cards, and then he'd go to a territory and he'd moved up in the card, and then before you know it, he's had some years and tenure in the business and he's winning in territories. It told you when he was a heel and when he was a baby and when he was in tag team matches and when he feuded with his partners, and whether it started me with my adrenaline going. And Jim and I used to share results. He started with you're familiar with these recipe boxes?
Yeah, sure.
With the index cards in them?
As a matter of fact, I keep a lot of my wrestling data in one.
Yeah, well, we still have some of those here. But Jim had those, and he had index cards in them, and he'd have index cards, and then he'd put them into shoe boxes, and you take the length of a shoe box, and he'd start lining them up.
Yeah.
And he would give the results of entire cards. Now, you got to think about this, that back in 1968, 69, 70, 71, I got news for you, Tony. Not only did the promoters not want people like us to know this stuff was going on and that we could research this stuff, but it wasn't out there for the average soul. And Jim said to me one time really early, he says, and let me point something out. Jim never drove a car. He did not have a license by his own choice. So anywhere we did things, if he asked me do you want to do this or do that, it meant I was driving, and that was part of the deal, but I never had a problem with it. He said to me one time in 1969, it was in the summer, and we'd now knowing each other for, 6-8 months. And he said, you want to spend Saturday over at the library? And I'm like, what? He says, well, we can go through these newspapers, and they got microfiche machines there. And he says, okay, this was all news to me. This is cool. And we started going through newspapers. We went to the St. Paul Public Library, which at the time was downtown St. Paul. It was a huge place. It was the main library. And we went into these rooms, and we were asking for newspapers. And Jim and I spent about this one Saturday, I swear we got there at like 9:30 in the morning, and we were there till 5. Wow. And they kicked us out. But that was just the start. And Jim was a was a maniac about this. He wanted to find results. He wanted to find cards, wrestling matches in cities. And like I say, promoters didn't want us to know those things. So that's where I got the bug. And I feel I always learned it from the master.
Yeah.
And throughout his life, he would chronicle these results. He taught me the reason for doing life results records on wrestlers. And if you were to walk in this room, you see right behind me and right in front of me is a row of file cabinets, and I've got over about 75 results books that I've done on wrestlers. And I learned that from Jim. He was the master. He really was. And so he was working for Norman Kietzer at the time, who, as you alluded to, had Pro Wrestling Enterprises. That was the company that put out the wrestling news. And Jim and I, we used to take the programs to the Twin Cities matches. And then we'd collect the money for them when we got done, and we'd give them to Norman. We'd drive down to Mankato and visit with Norman Kietzer, who's just a hoot of a guy. On a side note, he's going through some health issues, and he's up in the years, and I always pray for him that he does well. He's a character. Yeah. I could write a book on our adventures with Norman. But Jim and I did this religiously, and he was always a stickler on that. If it isn't right, you don't print it. If it isn't right, you don't write it. If it isn't right, you don't say it. And on wrestling, and so I feel very honored that I grew up around him for the next 30 plus years, and I was excited when back, I want to say, and I don't know the date exactly, but I want to say it was the early 2000s. It would have been maybe 2003 or 4. Mike Chapman in the George Tragos Lou Thesz Museum was in Newton, Iowa at the time. And Mike Chapman was the head guru of the museum. And he created, in Jim Melby's honor, he said, we have to have a way to honor the historians, the people that work hard. And
according to my records, 2006 was
okay. That would be correct. And Jim actually got the first
so it would be
award
20 years ago this year.
Yeah. Wow. Jim got the first James Melby Award, and that was
Chapman
created by Mike Chapman.
Yeah, Mike Chapman got the 2007.
Yeah. And so that's the long story of it. And then, unfortunately, in 2007, we lost Jim. He passed away. He had struggled for most of his adult life since about age 20, when shortly after I met him, he had just severe diabetes. And towards the end of his life, he had lost both of his legs, much of his eyesight. And when I got the news that he passed away, it was I pointed out to you in a previous conversation that only a week earlier, him and I had talked on the phone like we usually did. And we were going to get together on a week from that Saturday. And he had passed away right before that. And on the Saturday we were to get together. I didn't have to, I volunteered to do the eulogy at his memorial service, which there were about 300 of his close friends and family there.
Gosh.
And I paid homage to a guy who I truly loved. And to this day, I'm blessed. And so that all leads up to the importance of the award that you, Tony, are getting. You need to take it as the honor it is, and I know you're excited beyond it, but you deserve it. You know, everything I've seen you do just in the last couple of years, my God, I get tired just watching you work, and I could totally feel the excitement that you have, and I think that's why I'm going to be there. I told you immediately when I heard the news that I'm coming to Waterloo, and I'm going to be there to hold your hand and shake it and congratulate you in person, because I know in my heart that Jim Melby, if you had an opportunity to meet him, you would have loved the guy, and he would be so proud of you getting the award in his name. Trust
Oh,
me,
wow.
he would have loved it.
That means a lot to me. I mean, when I look at the names of the people that have won the award before, Mike Chapman, we mentioned, Greg Oliver, Steve Johnson, Mike Mooneyham, J. Michael Kenyon, Scott Teal, Bill Apter, George Napolitano, Larry Matazik, Wade Keller, Dave Meltzer, Scott Williams, Koji Miyamoto, Mark James, Dick Bourne. Dick Bourne just sent me. Dick Bourne wrote the books on the title belts, the NWA 10 pounds of gold, and I had asked him a couple of years ago. I said, Dick, I got this in paperback. Like, do you ever plan on publishing this in hardcover? And he wrote me back and said, no, I don't have any plans to do that at this time. Well, a few months ago, I get a box, and it's from Dick Bourne from Mid-Atlantic Gateway. And it's a hardcover version of the 10 Pounds of Gold book. And,
Wow.
and he sent me an email, private email, and he said, I hope you will never sell this on eBay or let this go, because this is the only one that's ever going to be printed.
Awesome.
And he wrote me a nice note and I assured him, I'm like, I don't buy things to sell them. If I buy
Neither, Tony.
if I buy them or if I acquire them in some way, I don't put them up for auction. And I don't begrudge people who do. That's just not my thing. I want it in my own little collection. And so that was very nice of Dick to do. And then another couple of guys here, Tom Burke, who I just think the world of, Al Getz, and then one of my closest friends in this whole thing is Tim Hornbaker, who was very, very nice to me. And we're setting, I told this story last week or the week before on the show, I can't remember, but we're setting there last year at the Tragos-Thesz weekend when Tim won the Melby Award. And every year they do a special poster with all the award winners and all of that, and they send the poster around, and you have to sign 1 million of them, So I'm holding the posters and feeding Tim the posters, and he said, somebody will be doing this for you next year. And I just looked at him and I'm like, no, like maybe 5 years from now, or maybe even 10 years, or maybe never, Tim. He goes, well, I think you'll be doing this next year. And so I just, it was prophetic in a way, and so surprising to me that I would be receiving it. But it is one of the biggest honors of my entire life, and I am so excited. And as I was telling you at one point, when I decided to go down this path of being whatever a historian is, I guess there's all different kinds of definitions. I
Very much so.
kind of think I'm more of a storyteller than a historian. But I one of the first things I did was I got this list of people that had won this award, and of the ones that I knew and I had contacts with, I formulated a list of 10 to 15 questions. And I emailed that list of questions out to all of them. And I'm like, here's what I need to know about this historian thing. And they all, pretty much everybody, responded and answered my 10 to 15 questions. And it provided a nice base. So, like, I knew what I was getting into, in other words, because they did such a great job of answering my questions. And looking at that list of things that they all said, I said, I'm going to be different. I'm going to be a different kind of historian. Like I say, I'm more of a storyteller than a historian. I want to try to figure out a way to communicate these ideas besides, and there's nothing, I'm an author myself, and I like to write, obviously. And I think writing books is important, but I just thought in today's day and time, it was more important to me to have a show, to have a podcast. And I just didn't see very many historians that had podcasts. I mean, Cornette comes to mind, but outside of him, I can't really think of too many. And that's when I came up with the idea for the time tunnel, and having this hub where this information could be published. And I really thought, before I put a book out, I got to establish myself. I mean, people are going to pick this book up and go, who's this guy? But if I can establish myself through the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel and through the podcast, by the time I get my first book written, I'll have somewhat of a basis, of people who kind of know, not knowing I was going to win this award, which, like I say, it's just a huge blessing, George.
Well, and the thing is, I think when you talk about being a storyteller, the one thing I've learned, Tony, is that over the years, and I've been around, I don't know how many decades it is now with wrestling, but I've learned that, yeah, the books are fine, but wrestling fans by their nature, yeah, there's a small audience for certain books, and the books will sell sometimes depending on the wrestler or the territory, but it is not as lucrative as most people would think. And so, sort of like you, I have enjoyed being, and I don't know, you use the word storyteller, and I think I might be in the same mode that I'm telling stories, I'm sharing history when I go on podcasts. I had a chance a few years ago to go, Brian Last, you know who he is?
Oh, of course, yes.
Arcadian Vanguard.
Yeah.
Brian and I talked at length, and he wanted me to do an AWA podcast on his Vanguard network. And now this was right around 2020 during COVID. And I had way too many things on my plate in that couple years there. And I said, no, I'm not interested. I said, I do enjoy going on podcasts and I will share tons of stuff, but I don't want to be in charge of a podcast at this point. And so that's where that's at. But you've taken the bull by the horns and started a network of podcasts, and you've always got you've got a long laundry list of some great talents that you bring on your show. Many of them are mutual friends,
right,
of both of ours, and guys that I respect totally, just as you do. And I think that's where all of us are at this point in time, where I think we can get our word and our stories out there much better by doing podcasts than we can by putting it into a book that only a few will buy and it'll end up on a shelf or an attic somewhere.
Well, you definitely fit in the storyteller category because here's how I define it, and I even have it on my website. I think a storyteller is somebody who takes a certain viewpoint in a window to an era and communicates what it was like in that era. Like they're able to take the listener or the person who's involved or interested in the story, they're able to take them there and describe what it was like and what the situation was with a great deal of accuracy. And that's what I enjoy doing, primarily on those years, as we mentioned earlier, those years that don't have a lot of video.
Right.
But we still, and these are some of the most prime years of pro wrestling history.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, these mid 60s and late 60s and early 70s, I mean, these are just some prime real estate for pro wrestling history that we need to make sure that don't get lost. And I started thinking, I want to try to find as many people as I can and interview them or have them on the show or whatever, because you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring.
Exactly.
And so as much as this as we can get recorded through audio and video and other means, books are great, like you said, and we need to make sure that's a part of it, but that's not all of it.
Well, and I think I was really glad when you and I first hooked up together, because I think we share the same backgrounds in a lot of ways, Tony. I know you're a radio person. I've got a radio background that I'm proud of. I love presenting in front of groups. I do wrestling podcasts all the time, as you know, but I also do local presentations here at our historical society and at the libraries. Always have a good audience of 30, 40, 50 people that show up and are interested in the stories, talking about their favorites. And
well, I mean,
I'm excited for that.
Minneapolis has always been a prime wrestling city. I mean, that whole territory has just been, Minneapolis and St. Paul both have a storied history of pro wrestling. And I'm glad you didn't do that podcast with Brian, because it gives me the opportunity to do one with you sometime. So,
Well, we can. I do a lot of podcasts and I enjoy them. There are some that I've done that I've done a one only and I move on because it really wasn't where I wanted to be.
sure.
But all of them that I'm on, yours included, man, I think you and I could sit and talk for years, not
could.
hours, years,
We could.
and not come up for air. So, but seriously, just getting back to the award that you're going to get, Tony,
Mhm.
I can imagine the butterflies you have in your stomach, and you're like a little kid on Christmas morning waiting for, that moment you can open up your present, and I get it, and I just am so happy for you. I sincerely mean, and I'm going to tell you that in person again when we see each other in 4 or 5 days here. But
Well,
they made a good choice. They made a good choice.
You and your beautiful wife are going to be at my table.
Absolutely.
And each of the award winners get their own table, and they get to, choose the people that sit with them. And so, along with some other folks that are involved here in the show and the podcast and stuff. And I'm going to spring this on you, and I'm going to do it right here in front of everybody. But I was wondering if you would induct me. If you would, if you'd introduce me and induct me at the dinner.
It would be an honor.
Good.
Oh my God, yes. Absolutely.
Well,
wow.
I'd really appreciate that, George, if you'd do that.
I would do it, and you just made me think of Jim again. How he's important.
Well, I made my decision. I made my decision on that when I read your story about him. When you sent me the books and I read the story about your relationship with him, I'm like, how can I not have George do it? I mean, he's been a supporter of mine since day one. He always puts me over. He always supports me. He reads everything I do and write. And he was friends with the guy whose name is on the award. I mean, how can I not have him, introduce me and induct me into the Hall of Fame? And you were part of the original award. You were part of the original Hall of Fame, and I just
I was there. I was there in '99 when the Newton, Iowa Museum opened up. I was there with Jim. We drove down together.
Yes.
And Tony, I'm honored, and yes,
Good.
I accept.
Wonderful.
I absolutely. I'm going to say selfishly that someday I'm going to do this for you, and then I'm going to hope someday maybe you'll be able to do it for me if that ever happens.
I hope so.
Wow.
George.
But no, oh my God, it'll be my honor, Tony.
Okay, man.
You're making me tear up. Thank you.
Well, I'll have to be, I'll will that night, I'm sure. So I'll have to have a handkerchief supply on
As
me.
a side note, you know how important this is to me. I worked in a bank for 30 years, okay?
Yep.
In my banking career. And of course, I had to have a suit and tie on every single day of my career. And when I retired, I took all my ties the day after I retired and I snipped them.
Yep.
I did. I only kept, I think, one, but I snipped about 25 ties. And it was my Declaration of Independence.
I understand.
Because I was never a tie person, but that was my job and I respected it and I still do.
I wore them because I had to.
Well, exactly. I had to, and I did it because I wanted to in the profession I was in. I felt it was the way it should be back in those days. And I went out here about a week and a half ago and I made sure that I had a suit ready to come to the banquet, and I've got my tie I picked out, and so now I get to present you. I'll be happy. Oh man,
that's another thing. I'm responsible for George putting on a tie.
And do it with honor. I'm honored, absolutely, my friend. Oh my God.
All right. Well, listen. Thanks for coming on and talking about the award, and thank you for all your support, and I'm excited about this weekend, and thanks for spending a little time with me today on the show.
Tony, friendships are so important to me. I can't tell you, it'd take me forever to tell you what friendships mean to me. I've said this, they're God's greatest blessing, and you're one of them that have come along that though we haven't had that chance to connect really in person, we're going to. And
We will.
I love you, man. I really do.
Thank you,
So
George.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that visit. It was just like sitting and listening to George Schire and I having coffee one morning. And that conversation is just like the telephone and Zoom calls that we do. We talk at least once or twice a week. And so you get to sit in on what one of our conversations sounds like. And I did throw him a little bit of a surprise curveball there. And you could tell how touched and moved George was about that. And I am so excited to have him be the one who inducts me and introduces me at the Hall of Fame in Waterloo this coming weekend. And so thanks to George and thanks to Ron Fuller for both stopping by the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel History Show this week. Before I forget, next week, another 1976 year in review. We're going to hit the first part. The Tennessee territory was so huge, so large, and had so much going on. It takes at least 2 shows to cover the whole year. And we'll get show number 1 going next week as Tim Deals, a very popular analyst and co-host for this show. He's a Tennessee wrestling historian, lives down near Chattanooga, Tennessee. He grew up in North Georgia, and he grew up about the same time period as me. And he grew up on the eastern end of the territory. I grew up on the western end of the territory. And between the two of us, we got great memories about the whole territory. And we're going to talk about that. It's going to be exciting because 1976, the seeds of the breakup are starting to be planted between Jerry Jarrett and Nick Gulas. And we're going to work our way toward that breakup in 1977. We're going to talk about the UWA and the involvement of the people in the UWA, a former NWA world champion being one of them. And they running in Nashville and some of the towns around there. And we're going to talk about how the Tennessee Athletic Commission handled that and what the politics were and what the situation circumstances were. Tim, of course, is a great knowledgeable person on the Tennessee Athletic Commission. And so we're going to talk about all of that stuff here next week. Tennessee territory, 1976, here on the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel History Show. I think that's it. This is going to be one of the biggest weekends of my life. And I can't tell you how honored and excited that I am that I'm being recognized for the preservation of wrestling history and journalism through my work here at the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. If you haven't been over to our Substack page, our website, that is where the majority of my recording of wrestling history takes place. It's Tony Richards 4. It's .substack.com. And just gone through and organized a lot of our content. So now we've got some new navigation buttons on it and some new links to some of the history pieces and a special section. If you're a premium subscriber for $5 a month or $50 a year, if you want to save $10 on an annual subscription. So my premium subscribers financially support the history work that I do at that $5 a month rate. And so there's a special section now called The Vault. And The Vault contains all our premium content. So if you're interested in what additional kind of material you would get if you became a premium subscriber and financially invested in the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel, you'll see there's a whole bunch of content that's extra that is available to our paid subscribers. And we do the free content to all our subscribers. It doesn't cost you anything to sign up. You'll get an email every single day. I'll tell you that, because the Daily Chronicle, my pro wrestling history of the territory era newsletter, comes out every morning at 5 a.m. Central, 6 a.m. Eastern Time, with a birthday list and a rest in peace tribute to the wrestlers and people who involved in the business who passed on. And we have special biographical sketches and features. We have the 7 stages of the territory era series. We have the Flashback 1976 series that we do on Sundays. And there's just a whole lot of good stuff that doesn't cost you anything except your email address, and you're going to get emails that come to your inbox. And that's at the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. It's TonyRichards4.substack.com. and I hope you'll come by there, become a member of our family, and subscribe. And if you feel so inclined and you're interested in my work to the level that you want to contribute, $5 a month or $50 a year, become a premium subscriber. Thank you, and please, and God bless you. All right, well, that's our show for today. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope I get to see you this weekend. If we've never met and we don't know each other, listen, just come up to me. Just stick out your hand, say, hey, Tony, I'm so-and-so from so-and-so, and I'd love to meet you this weekend. I really would. And forgive me if I don't have a whole lot of time to visit. There'll be a lot going on. They've got our schedule chock full for the people who are being honored this weekend, but there's other times, at the bar and during lunch and other times where I do have some time, and I'd love to meet you. So come up, introduce yourself, and I'd like to meet you this weekend in Waterloo, Iowa at the Tragos-Thesz Hall of Fame weekend, Thursday through Sunday. And if you can, if you're coming, love to see you at the dinner on Friday night for the Hall of Fame inductions. Saturday afternoon at 2:30 for my history session. We've got the big softball game between JBL and Medusa's teams. It's going to be a great weekend, and I hope you can come there to Tragos-Thesz Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame in the Dan Gable Museum in Waterloo, Iowa. My episode number 4 is coming out this week of the history of Texas wrestling on Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw. It's my 4th big pro wrestling history series with Jerry Briscoe and John Bradshaw Layfield, and I hope you're following along with that as well. Episode 4 drops this week, where we're talking about the beginnings of Amarillo wrestling and Cal Farley and the original Dutch Mantel. We're talking about the big masked mystery of 1935 that pretty much started the entire lucha libre culture in Mexico, that came out of an angle and some series of matches that were done in Amarillo. We're going to talk about Daniel Boone Savage in Houston. We're going to talk about the first tag team match that took place in Houston. We're going to talk about the Texas heavyweight title and a whole lot more this week on episode 4 of the History of Texas Wrestling. All right, until we see each other again next time here on the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel History Show, live from the Richards Ranch in Western Kentucky, don't you forget, if you want better neighbors, be a better neighbor. Thanks, everybody. I'm Tony Richards. See you next week here on the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel History Show. So long from the Bluegrass State.
Thanks for tuning in to the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Podcast. Tune in for another great episode next week, interviewing wrestlers, referees, and media personalities that have made the sport of professional wrestling great. We'll release a new episode soon. Don't you dare miss it.